726. Daoist number 2 wore a Daoist robe, carried an immortal sword on his back, and wore a fish-tailed crown on his head. His junior apprentice brother Lu Qin, who was leaning on the railing, had a lotus crown on his head, and a sparrow perched on his shoulder. In the past, he was the leader of the Beko Keikyung building and the first disciple of the Daoist ancestor. He wore a Rui crown and a peach talisman. The reason why he could take in a disciple on behalf of his master was because he was the closest to the Daoist ancestor. At this moment, the immortal sword on Daoist number 2's back was vibrating non-stop. Rays of light flowed out of the scabbard, and golden seals manifested by the great Tao appeared one by one. However, after the golden words left the scabbard, they were immediately restrained by Daoist number 2's majestic Tao. The contents of the Daoist scriptures and treasured words could only be within a short distance. They were indeterminate. They couldn't leave the riverbed. Occasionally, a fish would jump out of the water, but it was only for a moment before it fell back into the water. Lu Qin joked, "Senior apprentice brother, your murderous aura is so strong. Be careful not to provoke the Dashiendu temple to activate their sword formation and ask for a sword in the Beko Keikyung building. Our Daoist son has tolerated you for a long time. Luckily, I found a junior apprentice brother for you. Otherwise, the matter of gathering 500 spiritual officials would probably be delayed for many years at the Fifth World. It would take at most 300 years, and at least 100 years. It wouldn't be good." Daoist number 2 did not comment on this. The grudge between the Beko Keikyung building and the Dashiendu temple was an old topic that was not interesting. As for the 500 spiritual officials returning to the immortal ranks, it was only a matter of time. By then, in the next 200 years, he would command the 500 spiritual officials to attack beyond the heavens. The otherworldly demons would be greatly weakened, and the 500 spiritual officials would be more worthy of their name. The three branches of the Beko Keikyung building actually had different opinions about the otherworldly demons that seemed impossible to kill. The second branch of the Daoist sect was very simple. They focused on killing. Other than going to the outer space to kill the extraterrestrial demons so that some of the extraterrestrial demons would not be nourished and strengthened, Daoist's second brother would have to personally wield his sword and rule the world in the future. He would command 500 spiritual officials and spend 500 years to kill the inner demons of the Qi cultivators. He wanted to make those countless extraterrestrial demons become like water without a source or a tree without roots. In the end, the extraterrestrial demons would be forced to merge into three. By then, he and his three senior and junior brothers would each defeat one of them and the world would be at peace. This was even more magnificent than someone who had slain all the true dragons in the world. As for the junior brother with the Daoist name of Shanqing, Daoist number 2 had an average impression of him. The only thing that made Daoist's second brother think highly of Shanqing was that in the New World, Shanqing dared to take the initiative to do things. He was willing to do things that even the last disciple of the Daoist ancestor could not be a protective talisman. Now that Shanqing was there, he had caused the Beko Keikyung building to become a lonely mountain of Taoism in the Fifth World. The Beko Keikyung building had more or less formed a confrontation with the other sections. It was precisely because of this that Daoist's second brother felt that it was not bad. The second chief of the Beko Keikyung building, who was known to be invincible, only laughed coldly and said, "I have been wanting to chop off the head of the sovereign ox blade for a long time." Back then, the honored master had deliberately spared his life and used a golden armor manifested from the purple golden lotus of the Daoist seed to capture him, forcing him to rely on cultivation to accumulate a little spiritual light and remove the golden armor on his own. By then, the honored master might have become a mighty lord in the desolate world. From then on, he had practiced Tao for 10,000 years and was almost immortal. He did not expect him to not cherish his good fortune and resort to underhanded means. He wanted to use Bai Ye's sword to break open the Daoist armor, which was a waste of God's gift. How could such a stupid person have the guts to be a guest of the Baeko Kaekyeong building? Regardless of Daoist second brother's temper, in a certain sense, he was indeed more in line with the secular sense of respect for the master than his two senior brothers. I advise senior brother not to get involved in the affairs of the world. Languid Lu Qin said, the first ancestor of the military school was so invincible back then. Didn't he still end up with his corpse divided into 5? Didn't he still die in the hands of the ants in his eyes? Other than his corpse being something to be fought over, after the first ancestor of the military school was dismembered, he integrated his soul into the martial arts fate of the world, paving a path for the pure martial artists of the future to ascend to the heavens. This was also the reason why the heavens had never purposely drawn the martial arts fate to stay or leave. The first ancestor of the military school had both ascended to the heavens and divided the human race. His merits and demerits did not offset each other. His merits and demerits were still great merits, and his mistakes were still punished for 10,000 years. As for the 5 chi cultivators who had their corpses divided, their realms were actually not high in the ancient battlefield back then. Someone had taken the head first, and the other 4 had their own gains. It was called a joint kill on a page of the ancient history. A little Daoist child rose into the air from the verdant city, one of the 5 cities of the Baeko Kaekyeong building. He hovered far above the sea of clouds and bowed to the sky. The little Daoist child did not dare to act rashly and ascended without permission. As one of the 5 cities of the Baeko Kaekyeong building, the verdant city was located at the northernmost side. According to Daoist son of the Dashiendu temple, the name of the verdant city came from a saying that the Jade Emperor Li Zizhen was really crisp. It was similar to how the Daoist ancestor planted a calabash vine that turned into 7 blade-strengthening calabashes. Of course, the Daoist of the verdant city would not admit to this and would regard it as nonsense. However, within the orthodoxy of the Baeko Kaekyeong building, the verdant city did indeed have another name for the Jade Emperor city. Under the jurisdiction of the verdant city were 72 lands. Among them, there were one of the 10 big grotto heavens, 2 of the 36 small grotto heavens, 3 of the 72 blessed lands, and 6 of the dynasties. As for the Daoist temples on and below the mountains, there were countless of them. Every 60 years, on the 25th day of the 12th lunar month, the lord of the verdant city would bring out a chariot to inspect the merits and demerits of the Daoist officials of the dynasties under the heavens. He would also assess the ghosts and deities of the mountains and rivers. Wherever the chariot passed by, it would be within the scope of assessment and inspection. It could even be beyond the jurisdiction of a single city. Therefore, the verdant city was one of the 12 buildings of the Baeko Kaekyeong building's 5 cities. Its position was not high, but it held great power. The reason why the city had such a transcendent position was because the great sect master of the Baeko Kaekyeong building had cultivated here for a very long time. Moreover, he would often preach the Tao to the world here. Whether it was the Daoist priests of the 3 branches of the Baeko Kaekyeong building, the Daoist officials of the mortal world, the spirits of the mountains and lakes, or the ghosts and spirits of the netherworld, they could all enter the city to seek enlightenment. Therefore, the verdant city was regarded as the Baeko Kaekyeong building's best place to forge good karma with the world. Lu Qin smiled and waved his hand, calling for Yunxing to come quickly. There was no need to be so polite. Only then did the little Daoist boy come to the highest point of the Baeko Kaekyeong building. After settling down in the corridor, he bowed to the 2 sect masters again, not daring to violate the rules at all. In fact, there were not many rules for cultivating in the Baeko Kaekyeong building. When the great sect master was in charge of the Baeko Kaekyeong building, or rather, the entire Qingming world, he had truly achieved non-interference governance. Even the great Xuandu Temple and the Sui-Chu Palace, which were important places of Taoism, were sincerely convinced by him. Even Lu Qin, the youngest disciple of the Daoist ancestor in the past, was in charge of the Baeko Kaekyeong building. It was just that there were more quarrels, more chaos, and more killings in the world. The heavenly drum was played in 8 places in the world, almost every year without stopping. The Baeko Kaekyung building and Lu Qin did not care too much about it. Only when the second sect master was in charge of the Baeko Kaekyung building, the rules were more serious. The second sect master glanced at the Daoist temple above the little Daoist boy's head and laughed coldly. The fishtail crown on the inverted hanging mountain was probably ordered by the elder ancestor of the Jiang family of the Purple Chi Tower to let the little fellow and his lineage be obedient. Now that he had returned to the Baeko Kaekyung building, Jiang Yunxing changed to the standard Daoist crown of Verdant City, the Rui crown. If it was not for his senior brother, the little Daoist boy would have changed to the lotus crown of his junior brother Lu Chen's lineage. Then, the second sect master would not have been so easy to talk to. The Baeko Kaekyung building and the entire Qingming world were clear about one thing. The fact that the second sect master did not say anything while watching coldly from the sidelines was in itself the greatest way to talk to him. Yunxing, when are you going to become the city lord of Verdant City? Uncle Master has even prepared a congratulatory gift. As a martial nephew, I can't let Uncle Master wait for too long. It's easy to get teary eyes. Lu Qin pressed his face against the railing and turned around with a smile. I have a good relationship with your grandmaster and honored master. Even if they don't come to the city lord ceremony, it's perfectly justifiable for Uncle Master to do it. Moreover, Uncle Master is known for having the least rules. A ceremony that would take a few days would take less than a joss stick's worth of time. The little Daoist boy still kept his mouth shut. He only bowed respectfully again, expressing his gratitude to Uncle Master Lu Qin and apologizing to the second sect master beside him. Back then, when he was young and ignorant, he went behind his family's back and joined the lineage of the Baeko Kaekyung building's great chief. It was actually a huge taboo. Most importantly, the great chief was suppressing the extraterrestrial demon in the outland and was unaware of it. It was purely his junior Uncle Master who secretly dragged him to Verdant City to worship. For this reason, the family did not hesitate to migrate him directly to the Hao Ran world. Moreover, it was the inverted hanging mountain. He was also required to wear a fishtail crown all year round. Otherwise, he would be banished from the family's ancestral hall or just stay in the Hao Ran world. The little Daoist boy's name was Jiang Yunxing. In the inverted hanging mountain, he and the sword-hugging man, Zhang Lu, had been neighbors and door gods for many years. Jiang Yunxing, who had the potential to become the city lord of Verdant City, leaned against the ox-tying pole in the inverted hanging mountain all year round. He liked to sit on the praying mat and watch scholars and beauties as well as the romance of the pugilistic world. He was the most approachable one among the Daoist sects in the inverted hanging mountain. Many young children liked to play there and let the little Daoist boy perform Dao techniques to help them ride on the clouds. Jiang Yunxing's family's patriarch was one of the 12 buildings in the 5 cities of the Baeko Kaekyung building, the owner of the Purple Chi building. He was in the Ascendant realm. The Purple Chi building was surrounded by mist and clouds. Purple Chi lingered around and there was sword aura gushing into the air. It was known as the floating sun and moon Purple Chi pile, home in the hands of the immortals. In addition, this building was located in the most eastern part of the Baeko Kaekyung building. It was ranked as the highest among the immortals. It was already the highest among the clouds and was the first to welcome the sun and moonlight. Most of the female immortals who cultivated in this building were originally surnamed Jiang or were bestowed with the surname Jiang. They usually had a hibiscus crown and a water hairpin. They also had the reputation of being a spring official. The Jiang family of the Baeko Kaekyung building and the Jiang family of the Tongyi continent were in similar situations. Verdant City and Divine Firmament City were neighbors. The city lords were from the lineage of the great chief of the Baeko Kaekyung building. The latter was the Daoist saint who guarded the Great Wall of Sword Aura. The great Lord of Heaven who guarded the main peak of the inverted hanging mountain was the direct disciple of the second Taoist brother. He was in charge of guarding the world's largest mountain seal that was hanging upside down in the vast world. Jiang Yunxing was born in the Purple Qi Tower, and this tower was undoubtedly the second generation of Taoists. However, when Jiang Yunxing was young, under the instigation of the third supreme leader, Lu Qin, as the direct descendant of the Purple Qi Tower's Jiang clan, he switched over to the lineage of the head supreme leader. According to the family genealogy, Jiang Yunxing was a few generations below the Purple Qi Tower's Laozu. However, according to the Qingming Heavens Dao lineage, he was of the same generation as the Laozu in the White Jade capital. Therefore, as long as he did not meet the patriarch in the Purple Qi building, he would greet him and address him as fellow apprentice brothers. However, it was a different matter when he returned to the Purple Qi building. The Heavenly Lord of the North Continent, Xie Shi, and the sect master of the Shin-Ao sect of the Aquarius continent, Heavenly Lord Qi Jin. Actually, there was also the old Heavenly Lord of Mount Taiping from the Tongyi continent and the Mountain Lord Song Mao. They belonged to Lu Chen's lineage, the second Taoist brother's lineage, and the great chief's lineage. Among them, the Divine Grandeur sect's Taoist lineage was relatively more complicated. Although the female Taoist wore a fishtail crown on her head, she was related to the other two lineages. She was related to the 5 cities and 12 buildings of the Beko Keikyung building, which was a world away. Of course, there was He Xiaoliang, who founded a sect in the North Continent, and the Taoist who lived in seclusion in the White Frost dynasty under the alias of Chao Rong in the Aquarius continent. They were all direct disciples of Lu Chen's lineage. These Taoist sects that originated from the 3 lineages of the Beko Keikyung building were on par with the celestial master residents of the Dragon Tiger Mountain in the vast world, and the talisman Yu Xian who was the stabilizing force of the One Mountain 5 sects. In the vast world, there were 3 sects and hundreds of sections. The Great Tao was different, and the human heart was not as simple as the division between good and evil. The second Taoist brother asked, back then in the Pearl Cave, why did you choose Chen Pingan to be your last disciple? He heard that one of his junior apprentice brother's direct disciples, the sect leader of the Cooling sect, He Xiaoliang, was involved with Chen Pingan. In fact, looking at how this mischievous junior brother of his had finally gotten serious for once, as long as Chen Pingan was willing to bargain, Lu Qin could even raise his seniority by another level. This was something that could be discussed. Lu Qin smiled and said, Chen Pingan was near the Flood Dragon Ravine. He had already pointed out the mystery with one sentence. I had my eyes on Chen Pingan, who had the potential to become my disciple and had abandoned his original path. It was not because of Chen Pingan himself. How could I, Lu Qin, view him? Otherwise, what could a Chen Pingan do to me? It seemed like I gave him many choices, but in reality, he had no choice. Isn't life like this? Chen Pingan was not the only one who was in such a predicament. Lu Qin continued, it's the same logic. The reason why that unreasonable ancient existence chose Chen Pingan was not because of Chen Pingan's own will. What could an ignorant youth know back then? In reality, it was because of what Qi Jingchen wanted. However, 1 gave birth to 2, 2 gave birth to 3, and 3 gave birth to all things. It gradually became very impressive. In the end, from Qi Jingchuan's little hope, it became Chen Pingan's entire life. However, I don't know what Dao Qi Jingchen asked Master when he traveled to the Little Lotus Cave. I had asked Master before, but Master did not tell me in detail. Thinking back to those years, the youth with straw sandals from the Clay Bottle Alley who first stepped on the bluestone roads of Fulu Street and Peach Leaf Alley, the kiln apprentice who had to subconsciously wipe his hands before taking out an envelope outside the school. At that time, the youth would never have imagined that his future would be like today's. He would have walked through so many mountains and rivers step by step, and witnessed so many magnificent scenes and life and death separations with his own eyes. Dao number 2 asked, Cui Dong seems to have changed his trump card to deal with the wasteland. Otherwise, Cui Dong would be able to use the chaotic times to free himself from many restraints. Lu Chen laughed. He wouldn't dare. Once he used it, it would be even more treacherous than deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors. Moreover, things happened in a hurry. Time waits for no man. There's nothing in the world that can be discussed properly. Lu Chen sighed. Cui Dong defeated the founding ancestor of the school of Taoism in his early years, causing the latter to recognize his own ten. Most of the cultivators at the peak of the world today do not know where the knowledge lies. Great knowledge. If the age of Dharma decline that everyone fears really comes one day, and no one is destined to be able to stop it, then even if there are no more school of Taoism cultivators in the world, no more cultivators, everyone will still be at the foot of the mountain. Lu Chen. When the time comes, only the knowledge left behind by the school of Taoism can be relied on to gain the most Tao. Perhaps the thing that made Cui Dong worried, for example, the human race disappearing because of this, and becoming the old subordinates of the new heavenly court's deities, are all very likely. Cui Dong seems to have always believed that that day would come. Thus, even if the Aquarius continent was in a perilous situation, Cui Dong still did not dare to truly ally with the school of Moism. Thus, the school of Moism, who was inevitably disappointed, felt that he was cheated by Xiao Hu, and turned to the South Pasua continent to help Chen Chunan. But the school of Moism is still the school of Moism. They still did not hesitate to bet all their wealth on the Aquarius continent. Furthermore, the school of Moism's business was indeed profitable. The school of Moism and Shang clan are indeed more daring than the school of agriculture and Yao clan. Dao number 2 thought of something. That Lu clan disciple, how do you plan to deal with him? The lotus blossom blessed land in the Tongyi continent of the vast world was divided into 4 parts by the old Abbey Dean's skill of drawing and painting. 3 of the lotus blossom blessed land followed the old Abbey Dean and ascended to the green underworld. Lu Tai sat on one of the blessed land, and successfully ascended out of the blessed land, and started to stand out in the Qingming heavens. He had a good relationship with the young female Taoist nun in the retained person realm, and they were not Dao companions, but Dao companions. Lu Qin said helplessly, Why, you want to take in a closed-door disciple? Aren't you afraid that Zhou Zi will get what he wants? Lu Chen was not willing to meet this disciple who changed his name to Lu Chuan, who was born with a rare yin-yang fish physique, and was worthy of being called a divine seed. The later generations did not know much about the divine seed, and did not know that the divine seed was the true Tao seed. Actually, it was not that one could be called a divine seed just because their cultivation talent was good. At most, they were just cultivators. Jiang Yunxing was dumbfounded. Back then at the inverted mountain, this little Daoist boy sent Lu Tai flying out of the Shangxiang Inn with a slap. Lu Tai now had a deep relationship with that stinking cow's nose. If he became the direct disciple of the second sect master, and took charge of one of the 12 buildings of the 5 cities, with Lu Tai's narrow-mindedness, wouldn't he fight with him for hundreds or thousands of years? In the Beko Keikyung building, his sect master had not appeared for a long time, and the 2 uncle masters took turns to take charge of it for 100 years, causing the entire Qingming heavens to be filled with fighting and killing. If it was not for the opening of the 5th world, Jiang Yunxing would have felt that his originally peaceful hometown had become a vast world where the inverted mountain was located. Now, the inverted mountain had become a Shan word seal that could be hung on one's waist, and could even be refined into a natal item. It was said that the second sect master had asked someone to give it to the little uncle master, Shan Qing. Jiang Yunxing was actually curious about the little uncle master that he had never met, but in the next 90 years, they were destined not to meet. The second sect master said, I never cared about these things. Let him calculate the heavens and earth, I walked my own path. Lu Chen shook his head. Zhou Zi's way of thinking is very peculiar. From the very beginning, he had seen the current world as the age of Dharma's end and deduced it. Practitioners can only sit and wait for the age of Dharma's end to arrive, but Zhou Zi had already started scheming long ago, and even neglected the founding masters of the three sections. His disappearance did not mean that he was blinded by a single leaf, but he turned a blind eye. Therefore, in the vast world, it is indeed normal for one person to suppress the entire Lu family. In the Pearl Grotto heaven, Lu Chen and Zhou Zi did not meet face to face. One was setting up a stall, while the other was still setting up a stall. They each had their own destiny. Both parties seemed to mind their own business, but in reality, they were named the same as the natal flying swords of Zhou Zi's direct disciple and Lu Chen's descendant. The casual conversation between the two senior and junior brothers only pitted the little Taoist child of Verdant City. The two uncle masters kept talking about the age of Dharma's end. Jiang Yunqing was shaken to the core, and his Tao heart was unstable. Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, "Yunqing, back then, your patriarch split open the sea of clouds with his fist and smashed towards the Pearl Grotto heaven. How impressive! It's a pity that you were far away at the inverted hanging mountain, and your Tao was lacking, so you didn't see it with your own eyes. It's all right, I have a painting of the river of time here that I have kept for many years. I'll give it to you. Take it to the Purple Clouds Tower and frame it properly. Your patriarch will definitely be happy, and he will no longer support you as the city lord of Verdant City in secret. He will only do it openly." The little Taoist child looked down, as if he did not hear anything. The second sect master frowned and said, "All right, don't beat around the bush to plead for mercy for the little brat. I don't have any thoughts about Jiang Yunqing and Verdant City. If you have any thoughts about the city lord's position, you can fight for it with your own abilities. I don't mind if Jiang Yunqing becomes the city lord. Verdant City has always been seen as eldest senior brother's territory. I don't have any opinions about who guards the door. The only thing I have an opinion about is that whoever guards the door badly will leave a mess for senior brother." Lu Chen shook his head. "Senior brother, oh senior brother, you and I are at such a high place. If we casually shake our sleeves, frown or yawn, the immortals below will have to carefully ponder over our thoughts for half a day. Fight? How can Jiang Yunqing fight?" Today, he finally mustered up the courage to catch up with his two uncle masters. In the end, the second sect master did not even look at him. How do you think the 5 cities and 12 towers will view Jiang Yunqing? At the end of the day, senior brother, you are just a casual person. Coincidentally, Jiang Yunqing can't control the great Tao even if he risks his life. Of course, senior brother doesn't have to care. If you feel that the great Tao is natural, then everything will return to one. The second sect master could not stand Lu Chen's attitude. It was not as natural as his master's, nor as straightforward as his senior brothers. He was a little impatient and said directly, "Do you want Shan Qing to take over Verdant City or Jiang Yunqing to take over?" Jiang Yunqing sighed. "All right, the third sect master is talking nonsense over there, implicating me." He really did not know if the third sect master was helping him or harming him. If the second sect master was not here, he would have started scolding him. Actually, Jiang Yunqing really did not care about the ownership of Verdant City. He had braced himself to come today because it was rare to see Uncle Master Lu. It would be better if Verdant City belonged to the newest Uncle Master. He would not be forced to do something beyond his ability. Because once he succeeded as the city lord of Verdant City, he would be very busy and there would be many disputes. Jiang Yunqing had stayed in the inverted mountain for a long time and was used to living a carefree life. If he had something to do, he would cultivate, and if he had nothing to do, he would flip through books. Moreover, with Jiang Yunqing's level and reputation, he did not have the qualifications to stand out and take charge of Verdant City, which was known as the Little Beko Keikyung building. Lu Chen chuckled and patted the little Daoist boy's head. Go back. The little Daoist boy hurriedly bowed and left. He rode the wind and returned to Verdant City. The second sect master said telepathically, "You just casually placed an otherworldly demon in Jiang Yunqing's heart of Tao." Lu Chen smiled. "I was bored." The second sect master reminded him, "You should return to the heavens beyond heaven." Lu Chen was only pretending to be stupid. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "Senior brother, have you ever thought that there would be a day when someone would ask you for a sword fight?" The second sect master said, "It's not something that happens often." Even if it was known as an invincible person, there were still people in this world who would ask for a sword fight with the second sect master of the Beko Keikyung building. Lu Chen smiled. "I'm talking about the kind of sword fight that requires you to use all your strength." Alliance? Bai Yi? Or is it Chen Pingan who ascended here? The second sect master asked, "How long do we have to wait? Besides, we don't even know if we can get it." Lu Chen raised both his hands and tapped his lotus crown with 2 fingers. He said innocently, "You said it yourself, senior brother." "I didn't say it." The second sect master smiled. "You're really bored." Lu Chen leaned on the railing. "I'm looking forward to Chen Pingan's travels in this world. Who knows, when he sets up a fortune-telling stall, he'll be even more familiar with it than I am." The second sect master said, "He'll have to have the physique of a martial artist from the 10th level. With the support of the spiritual energy of an ascended level cultivator, he'll be able to wield a sword and barely be a sword attendant." Lu Chen said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. He'll just have to reach the 14th level. He won't be a sword attendant, but a sword master of sword masters. Of course, he'll have to live well." The second sect master laughed. "I'm looking forward to it. I've cultivated for 8,000 years. If I miss the ancient battlefield, I won't be able to win." 727, Celestial Master Residence, Mount Longhu, the star-picking platform. After the little Daoist boy with a sword on his back appeared, another woman who had deliberately covered her face and figure with water clouds and mist performed a Buddha's blessing at the bottom of the stairs. Then, after receiving the Heavenly Master's order, she slowly ascended the stairs. When she stepped on the stairs, the camouflage automatically disappeared, revealing her true appearance. Although she was wearing a feather dress and a female crown, she was naturally charming and graceful. There was a red mole between her eyebrows. She was not only the most powerful celestial fox in the world, but also several worlds. She had been the guardian of Mount Longhu for 1,000 years. In Mount Longhu, she was called Lian Zhen. In the early years, when the Grand Celestial Master of Mount Longhu left the mountain to travel, she secretly followed the young Daoist boy and pretended to be a village girl. The Grand Celestial Master deliberately did not expose her identity and allowed her to follow him from afar. He even tacitly allowed her to observe his cultivation. After that, the young Celestial Master wandered the world and killed demons along the way. For 60 years, she relied on the protection of the Grand Celestial Master's merits to avoid several heavenly tribulations. In the end, she willingly followed the Grand Celestial Master to Mount Longhu to cultivate. In return, the Grand Celestial Master personally sealed her with a seal to help her withstand the heavenly tribulations. When she ascended the platform, she seemed to be able to pick the stars and the moon with a stretch of her hand. After Lian Jin ascended the platform, she immediately stopped and did not approach the young Grand Celestial Master. The main reason was that she was naturally in awe of the little Daoist boy with a sword on his back. The sword cultivator was the first of the 4 troublesome ghosts on the mountain, especially the sword immortal who could decapitate the head with a flying sword. One sword could break 10,000 laws. Whether it was killing enemies or slaying demons, it was not something made up by the legends and unofficial records. The little Daoist boy was the human form of the immortal sword 10,000 arts. Lian Zhen was suppressed by the restriction of the star-picking platform and revealed half of her true body. 10 huge snow-white tails crawled on the ground and hung all the way down the platform, almost covering the entire path. The young Taoist boy turned his head and smiled at the celestial fox. Lian Zhen hurriedly returned the greeting and made a Taoist bow. Under the star-picking platform, she considered herself to be the great heavenly master's maidservant. After ascending the platform, beside the most unreasonable sword spirit Wu Lei, Lian Zhen could only reluctantly consider herself as a Taoist friend so as to avoid provoking the other party's displeasure. Lian Zhen and Na Wu Lao almost never spoke. The two sides actually did not have many chances to meet face to face. The Grand Heaven Master had always addressed them as fellow Taoists and treated them as equals. He had never treated them as servants or maids. Lian Zhen knew why the Grand Heavenly Master and Wu Lei wanted to meet here today. They wanted to climb high and look at the Fuyao continent, which was located in the southwest of the vast world. However, the Fuyao continent was now part of the wildlands, and not even the Taoist magics of the Grand Heaven Master's Taoist magics would be able to see everything clearly. The Grand Heavenly Master continued, I plan to make a trip to the Tongya continent with the seal. You stay here and guard the mountain gate. Wu Lei was as expressionless as before. His voice was cold and clear. The present situation of the world is indeed worthy of you taking risks. However, you must not die at the hands of that Zhou Mi. Otherwise, do you want me to come and behead you? Lian Zhen was worried sick at heart. She wanted to persuade her master, but she did not have the guts to tell her master what to do in such an important matter. Just as her master had said in the past, the human world was always mysterious and pressured everywhere. For cultivators, the higher their Taoist magics were, the fewer paths they walked on, and the stronger the winds on the mountains and in the sky. Every time there was no choice, every time the heart could not help itself, there was a possibility of death. The wind would always be blown away by the rain, and the wind, and be as lonely as the river of time. As for the little Taoist child's cold expression and words, Lian Zhen was already used to it. Although the sword spirit was a servant in name, his great Tao was extremely pure. There was almost no distinction between good and evil like the later generations. The young Taoist reached out and lightly lifted an item. A green bamboo flute appeared at his waist. The inscription was taken from the opening of the 8 characters of the ancient Feng word inkstone. A large piece of qi, its name is Wind. The current Grand Heaven Master of Mount Longhu, Zhao Tianlai. One of the 10 in the Central Plains, ranked above the talisman Yu Xian. Even among the 10 who argued endlessly, he would definitely have a place among them. The 5 Thunders technique had the supreme praise of being the head of all techniques. The Grand Heaven Masters of Mount Longhu's past generations were fully deserving of being the world's #1 in thunder techniques. One sword to break all techniques. However, one of the 4 immortal swords, 10,000 techniques, was in the possession of Zhao Tianlai. Not only was Zhao Tianlai the oldest heaven master of Mount Longhu's history, his current level of mastery in Tao was second only to the founding master who had traveled far beyond the heavens and never returned. Moreover, Zhao Tianlai was regarded as one of the few who had the highest chance of reaching the 14th realm. However, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. The number of times a cultivator who had an immortal sword used his sword was far less than an ordinary sword cultivator on the mountain. Some busybodies had calculated the number of times the 3 immortal swords appeared. After Bai borrowed the immortal sword Tai Bai from the Taoist son of the Taoist temple, the number of times he used the sword should not exceed 10. The Beko Keikyung building in the Qingming world was truly invincible. In his long cultivation career, there were only a handful of people who had died at most. Furthermore, when facing those who were already considered to be at the peak of the mountain, there was no need to bring the Taoist scripture. The most recent one was at the Taoist temple. The second Daoist wore a Daoist robe and fought with the Daoist temple of the Daoist sword immortal lineage's ancestral court. As for the battle with the Alliance who had ascended to the heavens beyond the heavens, both sides were barehanded. One did not have a sword, while the other did not use his immortal sword. As for the Grand Heaven Master of Mount Longhu on the star-picking platform, compared to the previous two, the number of times he used his sword was considered more. It was roughly 3 to 5 times in each realm after leaving the mountain to travel. As for the fourth immortal sword, the number of peak cultivators who knew about it could be counted on one's fingers. Zhao Tianlai had a sword spirit and was proficient in divination, so he was counted as one of them. Not only did he know that the immortal sword was called Innocence, he also knew that this sword was not in the sword suppression tower of the South Saw continent, nor was it the longsword used by the Dragon Slayer 3,000 years ago. It was left behind in the Great Wall of Sword Qi for 10,000 years. As for the Dragon Slayer who had appeared out of nowhere and fallen like a comet, his identity and name were quite taboo. They only knew that he came from a high-grade blessed land that was still sealed for closed-door cultivation, but he had an unclear relationship with the first ancestor of the school of the military. No matter what, during the Dragon Slayer period, he was still able to teach a disciple like White Emperor City's son Zhuzhong. This person's name could be considered to be immortalized in history. It could be said that this person would always occupy a large amount of space and ink in the complicated unofficial history of the future. Zhao Tianlai turned his head and smiled. Fellow Daoist Lian Zhen, there seems to be someone in the Tongya continent who is on the same path as you. Lian Zhen nodded slightly. She is on the same path as me, but not of the same lineage. She is of the same lineage as Mr. Bai's green infant. This heavenly fox's voice was always soft, and she did not dare to speak loudly. Indeed, fellow Daoist Wu Lei's sword intent was too shocking. As one of the 4 sword spirits, its killing power was equivalent to that of an ascendant realm sword cultivator from the ancient times. Moreover, it had an inhuman temperament. As for the true refinement realm, it had a natural suppression of the great path. The ancient gods were high up in the sky. Before the appearance of the human race, the ones that they crushed and killed the most were the numerous demons on the ground. Among them, only those true dragons were slightly valued by the gods. They were gathered under one of the 5 supreme gods of the heavenly court in the past. The master of the heavenly court. The sword-bearer. Their positions were similar to the criminal officers of the Great Wall of Sword Qi in the future, or the law master of the ancestral hall on the mountain. The armor-bearer. Similar to the hidden officials of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, they had insight into everything in the world. The fire god governed the eternal stars. The water god guarded the long river of time. In addition, there were 12 supreme gods who easily lifted the world and dragged the stars. Among them, there were 2 who were in charge of the ascension platform, responsible for guiding the earth immortals. With the body of the human race, they became the true spirits of the divine path, which was the so-called ranking of immortals in the future. First, there were sword techniques and supernatural powers in the human world. The human race continued to rise, and the number of beings who became gods through the ascension platform increased. Then, there was a battle between water and fire. This was what old Yang said to Wan Xiao and Li Lu, both of you are the most guilty. Then, the sword-bearer was responsible for breaking the armor. It was rumored that both of them had fallen. According to common sense, this was indeed the case. The little Daoist boy could not help but roll his eyes. Lian Zhen was the slowest to realize it. She was also the most helpless. Lian Zhen asked softly, should I go and receive the guest? The Grand Celestial Master was annoyed. What guest? He's the host and I'm the guest. The 3 academies, Mount Sui in the Central Plains, Bai's Tower in Town, and the cottage built by Bai Yi in the 5th Celestial Master. When did he not become the host? He acted more like the host than the host. He could not wait to use his identity as the host to receive the guest. In the forbidden area of the Celestial Master's residence on Mount Longhu. The restriction here was even stricter than the ancestral mountain of the talisman Yuxian. A sneaky old elementary scholar snuck in. Instead of going to the star-plucking platform, he called out to the master several times in his mind. Since the master did not respond, he took it as a yes. He went straight to the Grand Heavenly Master's private residence. He was too embarrassed to step through the door, so he stood outside the front hall and raised his head. There was a couplet praising the Grand Heavenly Master's celestial demeanor and moral integrity. The old elementary scholar clicked his tongue in wonder. He really didn't know who in the world could have such a wonderful brush. The Grand Celestial Master had a good eye. He was willing to take down the original couplet and replace it with this one. The couplet's tone was grand. The honorable Taoist is virtuous and noble. I am in this mountain. The feather-clad minister sits still with his sword. The immortal wind contract is cool and refreshing. I don't know who knows. The demon-vanquishing heart belongs to the mortal world. All evil retreats. The yellow and purple noble lady hangs her seal in the wind. Her bones suppress the 5 peaks. Who doesn't cultivate, I cultivate. The horizontal scroll was the oneness of heaven and man. If one entered and went to the front hall, it would be the place where the celestial fox cultivated. The back hall was where the Grand Celestial Master practiced his Tao seeking. Back in those days, the teacher and a few of his disciples were drinking wine at the corner of the wall, using his hand as a fan to disperse the smell of alcohol. They talked about the celestial fox in the residence of the Celestial Master. Some of them guessed that it had 9 or 10 tails, while others guessed that the celestial fox had the intention of becoming the Celestial Master's Taoist companion. In the end, they asked the teacher for an answer. At that time, the old elementary scholar was not well known, so he did not have the money to travel around the residence of the Celestial Master. Some of the sayings were taken from unofficial history books, and even the old elementary scholar himself was not sure if they were true or false. He did not dare to say that he was careless and did not want to talk nonsense with his disciples. He only said that the Celestial Master did not speak of strange powers and chaotic spirits, which greatly disappointed the young man. Later on, the old elementary scholar became famous and did not need to spend money to go out. He invited the sage of literature to give lectures and preach Taoism in various places. The old elementary scholar specially made a trip to Mount Longhu, but he did not take the immortal bamboo raft ferry. He chose to walk up the mountain with the green bamboo stick. At that time, both sides of the divine path were lined with nobles and immortals from various temples and nunneries. Everyone was surprised and delighted. They were surprised because the sage of literature had never set foot in the immortal residences outside of the Confucian Academy. Therefore, he had made an exception for Mount Longhu. Moreover, it was said that the sage of literature had taken the initiative to submit the document to the Celestial Master residence. It was filled with all sorts of mischievous mountain spirits and water monsters, who had been suppressed by the Celestial Master's residence and brought back to the mountain. The courtyard was surrounded by a white jade fence, upon which were carved 9 strange beasts, including a snow-white flood dragon. This was the essence of lightning refined by the previous Celestial Master's residence. There was also a great hall that was never opened. On the door was a talisman, created by the Celestial Master's seal. It was rumored that countless evil spirits were suppressed inside. The Celestial Masters of each generation would be sealed twice in their lifetime, when they received the seal and when they received the seal. In the backyard of the Celestial Master's residence was a 1,000-year-old cassia tree, which was so tall that the old elementary scholar couldn't find a single pebble on the ground. This cassia tree was something that the Celestial Master had come across by chance when he was traveling the Aquarius continent with his sword in hand. Cassia wine brewed from cassia seeds was buried in the clouds and served to guests. It was the best wine on the mountain. As for the cross-continent trip, of course Xiao Tianxi had gone after the pink-robed man from the Valurium Pavilion. So what if he was the junior brother of White Emperor City Xingjuzhong? Brother Tianxi would still kill him. The celestial master of Mount Longhu leaving the mountain with his sword on his back was a threat to White Emperor City from afar. Of course, Brother Huaixin didn't pay much attention to the friendship between fellow disciples. The old elementary scholar rarely admired the courage and insight of others, but this fellow, who had changed his name to Lu Qiqing, was quite good. He was the same kind of person as Lu Chen's chief disciple, the old boat master of Osmanthus Island. He had provoked the celestial master of Mount Longhu, endured the tortoise-camel tablet of the talisman Yuxian, escaped from the Aquarius continent with great difficulty, and then provoked little Qi and little Pinghen, as well as one of the leaders of the Tao, the water god Li Lu. What a good man, what a talent. The next time we meet, I'll call Xingjuzhong brother first, and then Lu Qiqing brother Lu. That's fine. After all, White Emperor City had always had a good relationship with the sage of literature. But when the old elementary scholar thought about it, he couldn't help but feel sad. A good relationship with the devil Tao. The Imperial Book Pavilion. It was the place where the sages of the Confucian temples of the Central Plains, and the plaques and couplets given by the major sects were kept, as well as the imperial edicts and letters of the emperors of various countries. There were countless golden books, jade archives, and green manuscripts in the pavilion, which were rich in literary fate and abundant in imperial qi. In the words of the old elementary scholar, it was enough to make people turn their heads away after a single glance. It was too much to look at, too much to look at. The old elementary scholar suddenly looked a little embarrassed. A beautiful woman was in charge of guarding the forbidden area. She had a young face, but her seniority in the celestial master's residence was very high. She was in charge of the small world, and she was in the immortal realm. She was keenly aware of the aura of the old elementary scholar, so she immediately appeared at the door and bowed. Instead of denouncing the old elementary scholar for trespassing, she asked softly in her mind, "Sage of literature, may I ask if Mr. Zhua is all right?" The old elementary scholar stomped his feet and said, "My disciple is blind." Instead of being caught in the big picture, it would be better to let the young man walk on his own path. In this way, Fire Dragon Jinren would not have to feel guilty towards Mount Longhu. Just take it as a happy ending. In the world of Taoism, the peaks compete with each other, each with their own strengths. Zhao Tianlai had the same view towards the talisman Yuxian and Fire Dragon Jinren. Many of the nobles in the residence of the Celestial Master still could not accept the title of talisman. It was reasonable. However, if Zhao Tianlai, as a Celestial Master, wanted to stick to it, the orthodoxy of Mount Longhu was the real danger. It was not that they did not compete at all, but they competed for the greater Tao. Otherwise, if there were other high peaks on the ground, Mount Longhu would chop off the peak of the mountain with a sword, smash the tree with a seal, or use Yuxian's talisman to suppress the peak of the mountain, while Fire Dragon Jinren could move the mountain with a wave of his sleeve. In this way, the many orthodoxies in the world might as well acknowledge the three orthodoxies of Beko Keikyung building as their ancestors. The old scholar nodded vigorously, yes, yes, yes. A hero does not talk about the pros and cons. He only knows what is right and wrong in his heart. The Tao is the Tao, we can't just talk about it while secretly sabotaging it. The old scholar's words were not important. Zhao Tianlai asked directly, "You're here for Bai Yi?" The old scholar didn't try to hide anything. If he tried to scheme against the Grand Celestial Master of Mount Longhu, it would only backfire on him. Therefore, he went straight to the point. "I'm sure you can tell what I did at Sui Mountain. That disciple of mine is being held back by Xiao Chua too much." Lu Ji, who left the South Saw continent, can't defeat Lu Cha in the end. Therefore, in the end, only Bai Yi and Yu Xian will face the 7 sovereigns of the wildlands. Once Lu Cha uses his full strength, the mountains and rivers of the continent will change. Behind the two, Lian Zhen wanted to say something but stopped. The old scholar smiled bitterly. I'm not saying that the celestial master has to risk his life. There's no such logic in this world. His mouth is crooked, his heart is crooked, and his righteousness is not true. I just hope that the celestial master will do his best. That's enough, very enough. For example, even if you can't save Bai Yi, you can at least save Yu Xian. With this, Mount Longhu will become the world's talisman. Especially within your Daoist talisman sect, there won't be so much quarreling over who the word talisman belongs. Quarreling will really kill people. Over the years, how many big and small messy debts have been caused by the people on the mountain and the people below it? Of course, I'm just giving you an example. How can the celestial master not make things difficult for you? Lian Zhen asked curiously, Old Master Wenxing, can I ask about the ascension platform? Old Xiao smiled and said, why can't you ask about it? The ancient heavenly court is located in a distant galaxy. The so-called immortals can ride the wind, but they might not be able to reach it in their lifetime. In the past, when the gods came to the human world, except for a few who had supernatural powers and could ignore the river of time, most of them had to go to the ascension platform. Therefore, the ascension platform was not only used to guide the earth immortals to ascend. Heavenly Lord Qin Tong was in charge of one of them, because there were actually 2. As for the other one, it was the moon-bearing mountain in the wilderness. However, it was no longer worthy of its name. Back then, Qin Qingdu, the dragon monarch, and Guan Zhao did not challenge the moon-bearing mountain because of personal feelings. However, the old scholar did not say much about the rest of the inside story. Zhao Tianlai did not tell Lian Zhen that a jar of osmanthus wine could not buy a few pages of the ancient almanac. Besides, as one of the 4 ancient sword spirits, fellow Daoist Wu Lei probably knew the truth even better than the Grand Heaven Master. Old Xiao stood up and smiled. Although I did not get what I wanted, it is all thanks to Miss Lian Zhen's good fortune. Last time, I drank a pot of good tea, and today, I drank a pot of good wine here. I am a guest. As an old scholar, I am embarrassed, but I always pay attention to etiquette. Last time, I gave a couplet, and today, I will give a seal to a young man from Mount Longhu who has been on the Tao path for many years. I hope that either Grand Heavenly Master or Miss Lian Zhen can pass it to him in the future. Zhao Tianlai stood up. In the end, we should keep the goodies within the family. Zhao Yao, who left Lizhu Grotto Heaven on an ox cart, was one of Qi Jingquan's direct disciples. After that, he traveled the central divine continent and cultivated in a Daoist palace in Mount Longhu for a period of time. He was not considered an unofficial disciple, and his identity was still that of a Confucian scholar. In the end, Zhao Yao went to the 5th world. It seemed like there was someone he missed so much in that ascension city. Because of some clues, according to the Daoist palace spiritual master's deduction, Zhao Yao had a close relationship with Bai. Zhao Tianlai held the flute with both hands and smiled without saying a word. Lian Zhen knew that her master did not want to be involved in too many affairs of the mortal world, so she had to take over the white jade seal from the sage of literature. In fact, she and the young man, Xiao Yao, were not strangers. The old scholar laughed and said, "It's not something that can't be seen. Miss Lian Zhen, just look at the contents of the seal. Anyway, you're not in a hurry to hand it over to Xiao Yao. You'll need to keep it for about 90 years. Not only that, Ningyao picked up the mountain word steel with her sword and moved it back to the peak of the sword word steel. Before she moved the word steal and left, she left behind another sentence with the pale-faced Shan Qing. The last disciple of the Tao ancestor who destroyed the sword word tacitly agreed to this matter. Then, he had no choice but to go into seclusion to recuperate. After this battle, there was no doubt that Ning Yao was the #1 person in the New World. On her way back to the sword word steal, Ning Yao received a message from Ascension City. In the southern boundary of the Qi word steal, she had a dispute with a large group of cultivators from the Tongyi continent. Due to the solemn atmosphere of the ancestral hall meeting, the hidden official's bloodline had mentioned how to deal with the outside world. It was inevitable that many sword cultivators were restrained and didn't dare to use their full strength to kill their opponents. Therefore, Ning Yao could only fly her sword south and attack the outside world again. From then on, the entire Ascension City, including the sword cultivators who built the city in the south, understood that they didn't need to be too polite to the cultivators from the Tongyi continent. As long as they were in the right, they could anger these immortal masters of the Tongyi continent to death. Deng Liang was more farsighted than Qi Shou and Gao Yeho. He took the initiative to drink with the two of them in private. The general idea was that if Ning Yao attacked, not only would it relieve their anger, it would also be more worth it. Because in this way, it would incur the hatred of all the cultivators from the Tongyi continent. However, it would also unknowingly pull the relationship between Ascension City and the cultivators from the Fuyao continent closer. It would make the latter feel more comfortable and gain points. They would have an additional natural closeness to Ascension City. This was the heart of the vast world. It could be used well. As for the immortal masters of the Tongyi continent, don't look at how each one of them was filled with righteous indignation. In the future, as long as there was an opening for the identity of Ascension City's outer sect immortal masters, the other party would only be more willing to throw money at them. After Ning Yao returned to Ascension City, she was in a bad mood. Today, in the twilight, Ning Yao made a rare trip to the wine shop. In the past, she was the gatekeeper of Lizhu Grotto Heaven Town. Now, she was the substitute shopkeeper of the wine shop. She was doing very well. There were a lot of drunkards and gamblers in the shop every day. Ning Yao held a wine bowl and looked at the signboard on the wall in the wine shop. Jing Dafeng only smiled and greeted Ning Yao. Then, he continued to lower his voice. With a wine bowl in his hand, he squatted by the side of the street and chatted with the group of customers. In detail, he talked about how he had a good dream that night and how the 24 hibiscus fairies in his dream were all outstanding beauties. In the end, he sighed with emotion. Which of us old men doesn't have a woman locked up in our hearts? What bachelor? In fact, there are no bachelors in the world. Especially after drinking the wine of my shop, you're not just a bachelor anymore. In fact, when Ning Yao appeared just now, the atmosphere in the wine shop suddenly changed. Only when Ning Yao entered the shop did she return to her normal self. There was no other way. Ning Yao's swordsmanship was getting better and better, and her prestige was getting stronger and stronger. Therefore, Ascension City naturally treated her as the second boss of the Sword Immortal. Above the criminal officer, hidden officer, and Quan Fu, Ning Yao was still the only one. It was a matter of course. Fortunately, Ning Yao went to the shop. Otherwise, the wine would be too reserved. Other than the one to Twisting Core, there was also one to the Taihui sword sect's Pian Ran Peak's direct disciple, the sword cultivator Hoary Head. At that time, he had told the youth in private to only give this letter to his master when he was sad and would drink alone. In that letter, Chen Pingon only asked Lu Jinglong to help reason with the wedding dress ghost. Chen Pingon felt that Lu Jinglong would do a better job than him. The other letter was given to Wei Wenlong at Spring Banner Zhai. Actually, there were two letters in one envelope. They were both family letters. One was given to Zhu Lian and the other to Lu Xianyang. The letter from Luopa Mountain contained many details. One of them was for Chao Qinglang to be the next mountain lord and for him to take good care of Pei Qian. The secret letter in Ning Yao's hand was the first letter the young hidden official had written but also the last one he had written. Ning Yao opened the envelope and saw the first sentence. Ning Yao immediately turned around. Twisting Core sighed faintly. She didn't know what nonsense the young hidden official had written in the letter to make a girl like Ning Yao avoid it. Twisting Core silently got up and took the lamp with her, leaving Ning Yao alone in the room. Ning Yao still turned around and read the first sentence of the secret letter again. Ning Yao, don't worry. I've been thinking about you, even in the last moment of my life. After that, Ning Yao would read some of the contents less often and some of the words more often. I'm sorry. It's clear that the situation is like this, but I have to act willfully. My life is like when I was young. I went up the mountain to pick herbs by the stream. It's just that I crossed the stream back then and was fortunate enough to meet you. I didn't do it this time and made you sad. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have gone to the Great Wall of Sword Chi to look for you. But how could I not look for you? If I had 10,000 more chances, I would have looked for you 10,000 more times. There's no other way. Chen Pingan can't always be an orphan in Mud Bottle Alley. He can't always be an apprentice in the kiln who learns everything. He can't always be the mountain lord of Luopa Mountain in Dolly's Longquan Commandery. Naturally, he can't always be a hidden official in the Great Wall of Sword Chi. The only one who can do it is Chen Pingan, who likes Ning Yao. Actually, after I grew up, I didn't feel uncomfortable or suffer in these years, whether it's traveling or resting. It's inevitable that I'll be disappointed. I just hope for more. It's just that some words of truth always make you angry and embarrassed, so I can only say them one by one. You once asked me, is it that great to like someone? I've always wanted to tell you that Chen Pingan likes Ning Yao, and Ning Yao likes Chen Pingan. Of course it's the greatest thing in the world. For thousands of years, only the two of us like each other. Meeting Ning Yao was the happiest thing that happened to Chen Pingan after he turned 4. Hello Miss Ning, my father's surname is Chen Pingan. My mother's surname is Chen, so my name is Chen Pingan. Ning Yao, you must be safe and sound. Ning Yao kept the letter and closed her eyes in silence for a long time. Finally, she got up and walked to the door. She reached out her hand again and touched her forehead. Twisting Heart walked out of the room and asked telepathically, is this the reason why you can't break through the bottleneck of the immortal realm? Ning Yao nodded. This immortal sword that had been nurtured for many years, naive, actually wanted Ning Yao to become a sword attendant. She, who was supposed to be the sword spirit, would become the sword master. Therefore, after ascending to the immortal realm, Ning Yao had almost imprisoned him twice in her heart. All these years, Naive was like a naughty girl, always running away. Even Ning Yao found it hard to find her. As for the previous strange feeling, it was because the immortal sword, Tai Bai, which was also a sword spirit, had a mysterious connection with Naive. She believed that the other two immortal swords, Wanfa of Longhu Mountain and Daoist scripture of Beko Keikyung Building, were similar to Naive. Twisting Heart said, take it slow. Ning Yao was silent. Twisting Heart looked at Ning Yao and suddenly laughed, you don't seem as sad as I thought. Ning Yao said, because I believe in him. The old scholar still only appeared in front of his family. He laughed and said, the little girl has become a big girl. Pei Qian subconsciously clasped her fists. Then, she felt that something was wrong. Seeing Sister Bao Ping clasp her fists, she immediately followed suit and bowed to Master Wenxing. Pei Qian had returned to the Central Divine Continent with Yu Zhuanfu not long ago. After hearing about this academy near the Yu family, she carried a bamboo box and traveled all the way here with her walking stick. As for the little mute man, he refused to move no matter what and stayed with Yu Zhuanfu's family as a mute. Pei Qian could only remind him not to forget to practice martial arts. The child still did not speak, neither agreeing nor rejecting. This academy was not among the 72 academies of Confucianism. If it was, Pei Qian would not have come. But Pei Qian did not expect to meet Sister Baoping. The old scholar waved at them and asked, "What's wrong? Quarreling with someone again?" Li Baoping nodded. The headmaster of the academy was one of the people who commented on what a mellow Confucian was. Not only that, but he also wrote many impassioned articles criticizing current affairs. He scolded the sages of his own family for this headmaster of the academy who came from the line of the quasi-sage and won him countless praises. However, it was said that some returning cultivators and scholars from the Fuyao continent and the South Sa continent wanted to argue with the headmaster, but they were all rejected. After a while, the headmaster wrote another article about how the world was deteriorating day by day and how worrying it was. Li Baoping argued with one of the headmaster's direct disciples. Li Baoping first agreed with the headmaster's good points. She said that the world and the Confucian temple of the central divine continent definitely allowed people to speak their minds. However, when Li Baoping mentioned the first thing that needed to be discussed, such as the headmaster's sincere words, did the so-called truth have to be the truth? When scholars read about the headmaster of the academy, shouldn't they reflect on themselves and be a little more patient and listen to the young people who disagreed with them to see if they were right? Unexpectedly, the other party immediately left with a face full of sarcasm. Li Baoping sighed at that time. It was the same thing again. 728, updated a little late. There is a big chapter on the 28th. When Jaime of the Wasteland left the northernmost ferry port of the Tongyi continent and used his supernatural powers to find Kuiyu and Fei Ran. One of them was casually strolling around the mountains. After suffering 2 losses in a foreign land and in her hometown, the round-faced girl in cotton clothes became more cautious. She began to diligently gather and refine the moonlight everywhere. The other one was admiring the moon at the peak of Zhaoping Peak outside the Great Spring Mirage City. Zhou casually brought one of the 10 young people to his side and accompanied him to admire a materialized building and a parasol tree that was hiding behind it. Embroidered Tiger Chui Liao was an expert in not competing with other people's strongest points. He liked to make up for his weaknesses first, and then unleash his own strengths to the extreme. This caused the fight for the Aquarius continent. No matter how Zhou schemed or used his methods, there was not much meaning, and he could only use offense against offense. Both Firen and Jia Yu bowed to Mr. Zhou. Zhou smiled and nodded. He then looked at Firen and smiled. "You are finally willing to use the name of senior brother Chia Yun." Firen said, "I am sorry for making a fool of myself." Firen is willing to take the initiative to apologize to Wuzi's military camp and exchange benefits according to the size of the military merit. If Firen does not have enough, I will borrow from senior brother. The capital of Daquan was temporarily safe. It wasn't because the mountain and river battle array of Mirage City was difficult to shake, nor was it because the border army of Daquan had gathered and shrunk into a city that was difficult to attack. Rather, it was because after Firen had left Peach Leaf Ferry earlier, he had a whimsical idea at Zhaoping Peak. He had sent a flying sword message to the old Wuzi tent, requesting that Mirage City of Daquan be his newest territory in Tongya continent. Furthermore, Firen was occupying the city by himself. It wasn't even the Guiyu tent, where Firen was located, that wanted this place. This created a great conflict with the Wuzi military tent stationed in the old capital of southern Qi. The title of one of the 10 youths was not enough to make the entire military tent fear him. In the end, the two sides did not fight because Firen had used one sentence to convince the other side. "Xia Yun is my senior brother. Firen did not need to say anything about using Chia Yun's military merit to exchange for Mirage City. The cultivators of the upper 5 realms in Wuxi's military camp closed their mouths and left silently. They did not leave behind a single harsh word. Swordsman Jia Shening. Tan was the direct disciple of the King Stage Great Demon Yang Ji. Yu Si was even addressed as Young Master by the Great Demon Fei Fei. In addition, Fei Ran and Chia Yun were martial brothers. These were all top secrets of the Jiazi tent. In the wilderness, reasoning was the easiest. However, since Mr. Zhou was making fun of her, Firen was willing to use another method to reason with him. In the wildlands, the reason was simple was because the rules were too simple. There were big and small reasons, and right and wrong could all be covered. Zhou Mi waved his hand and said something that Firen didn't understand. It's nothing. I'll settle the score for you personally later. Not to mention Mirage City, even the entire Great Spring Dynasty is something that Firen deserves. The demon cultivators of the upper 5 realms of the Tongyi continent had already sensed the changes in the weather of the continent. Fortunately, he didn't feel too much fear and was slightly comforted. In the middle of the Tongyi continent, a majestic building appeared. It should have appeared a long time ago, but it didn't. Before they parted, Zhou Mi had jokingly said to Fei Ran that he would only read half of the sage's book. If he read too much, he wouldn't be able to pretend to be a sage. If he read too much, he would be a true sage. Half of the book was just right, and he would gain both fame and fortune. Zhou Mi looked at the sky, as if waiting for something. Fei Ran's sword heart suddenly trembled, and she subconsciously wanted to distance herself from Zhou Mi. However, in the next moment, Fei Ran felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. However, Jia Yu had disappeared without a trace. Zhou Mi lightly shook his sleeves. On one of his sleeves, the snow-white moonlight shone brightly. Zhou Mi looked at the bright moon in the vast heaven and smiled, just in case. The true trump card of Fuyao Continent's 3 mountains and rivers restrictions, other than trapping Bai Yi, was Zhou Mi's heaven-reaching method to forcefully imprison that continent's river of time, turning it into an almost still lake. Zhou Mi suddenly said to Fei Ran telepathically, "Your senior apprentice brother wants me to pass a message to you. He has already done well enough to accept a disciple on behalf of his master. From now on, it's up to you." Fei Ran's expression was indifferent as she stared at this wasteland worlds one high. However, Zhou Mi's figure instantly disappeared. A sword gleam split open the sky, heading from Qingming Tian to the vast heaven. In the world, immortals could control the wind, and it was extremely difficult for them to be faster than flying swords. This was common sense, and as one of the 4 immortal swords, the Daoist scripture was naturally faster. At the highest point of the Beko Keikyung building, Lu Qin returned and sat on the railing. He looked at his second senior apprentice brother who didn't listen to his advice with a faint smile. The second senior apprentice brother frowned unhappily and asked, "What are you doing?" Lu Qin raised his hands and touched the slightly tilted lotus crown on his head that symbolized his status as the chief. "Aren't you afraid of ending up like the Tai Bai sword? True invincibility is true invincibility. Senior apprentice brother, are you going to throw away your reputation that has not fallen for 8,000 years? No matter how much Bai Yi cherishes old friendships, Bai Yi still needs to survive to be able to return this huge favor." "I don't think so. Senior apprentice brother's transaction has made me confused. May I ask the reason why senior apprentice brother gave me the sword?" Once he lost that handy Daoist scripture of the immortal sword, the title of senior apprentice brother invincible might fall to someone else. The second senior apprentice brother asked, "Junior apprentice brother, do you need a reason to break the rules by transforming into the sky demon and infiltrating Jiang Yunqing's Daoist seed?" Lu Qin said helplessly, "Of course I do. I just know that senior apprentice brother is too lazy to listen. Junior apprentice brother is too considerate to tell you." The second senior apprentice brother said, "Then there's indeed no reason for me to throw away the sword to the vast heaven. Scheming and scheming, doing something is near doing nothing. It's not tiring at all. I've wanted to say this to you for a long time. It's just that you've always been one who doesn't listen to other people's opinions. As your senior apprentice brother, I've always been too lazy to say anything to you." Lu Qin turned his head to look at the ethereal 5 cities and 12 buildings and lamented, "Senior apprentice brother doesn't need a reason to do things. This is probably the reason why I still acknowledge you as my junior apprentice brother even though our daos are different." The relationship between the 3 leaders of the Beko Keikyung building in the past was actually very subtle. She even regretted showing the secret letter to Ning Yao in advance. Be it the Taoist priest of Dragon Tiger Mountain or the second Daoist priest of Beko Keikyung building, Ning Yao was still at the bottleneck of the immortal realm. Not only did she have to take out the real natal flying sword and travel the world, but she also had to take part in the well-deserved fight of the immortals. It was not worth it. Once the celestial sword Innocence was damaged and returned with injuries, it would be a great loss. If the celestial sword was broken and lost in the battlefield of Fuyao continent, Ning Yao's realm would fall to Yupu. Ascendant City would lose the great sword celestial Ning Yao who was firmly on the throne of the world. Ning Yao was far from being the #1 ascendant realm cultivator in the new world. In the end, not only would Ning Yao's great path be blocked, but Ascendant City would also lose the opportunity to fight for the world. Ning Yao sat on the threshold and did not say anything. She just reached out and wiped the blood between her eyebrows. No matter how she weighed the pros and cons, Ning Yao should not act so impulsively. Twisted Axayan shook her head and said, "If Qin Pingon was here, he would definitely stop you. For the sake of Ascendant City, I will do everything I need to do." Ning Yao said, "But Ascendant City is Ascendant City, and I am me. If Ascendant City does not have an Ascendant Realm sword cultivator, it will lose the power of the world. I don't think Ascendant City can really fight for the world with Ning Yao. If Ascendant City really loses power, I will not owe Ascendant City anything. She would only owe him so much for planning." And Ning Yao did not think that he would stop her from taking out her sword. Besides, if he was a hidden official in Ascendant City, she would only have more free time. Why would she need to work so hard? She could just take out her sword. Ning Yao reached out and pressed the back of her hand against her forehead. The sword sacrifice this time was no small matter. Before this, besides Qin Qingdu, only Dong Sanging, Qin Shi, and a few other old sword cultivators knew that she actually had a second natal flying sword besides, Cutting Immortal. Besides, even if it was the natal flying sword, Cutting Immortal, Ning Yao was not willing to take it out, because it was easy to be attracted by Innocence and cause Ning Yao's sword heart to lose control. At that time, she would really become the sword servant of the immortal sword Innocence. The sword spirit of an immortal sword was untamed and its sword heart was pure to the extreme. Cultivators could only use their realm to suppress it or use a tough sword heart to temper it. There was no other way. Good and evil people, intimacy with the great Tao, were all false. Ning Yao nurtured the 2 flying swords to refine them, but also to test the sword Innocence with Cutting Immortal. In fact, Ning Yao had privately asked the eldest sword immortal a question. Was Qin Pingon really okay for the 60-year promise? At that time, Qin Qingdu did not answer the question. It depended on the senior's mood. Twisting Axayan suddenly frowned and said, "You have to be careful of the great Tao in this world." Ning Yao turned to look at the tailor. It was as if someone was reminding Twisting Axayan, and then Twisting Axayan was reminding herself. Twisting Axayan shook her head, "I still have to keep my promise on this matter." Ning Yao nodded, "Without Innocence, I still have Cutting Immortal." Twisting Axayan suddenly laughed, "The only person who can make him like is Ning Yao." That year in the prison, the young hidden official did not mention to anyone about his meeting and reunion with Ning Yao. He was like a miser. It was as if saying one more sentence would cost him a lot of money. So what if the Taoist master residence had an endless stream of guests? Could there be the first lord of Mount Hauran, the great god of Sui Mountain? Could there be Bai Zhe? Could there be the holy master or the sage of rites? One had to have a conscience. It was not a good habit to pretend to be innocent after taking advantage of others. It should be changed. After the old scholar was thrown out of the star-picking platform by Zhao Tianlai, the battlefield in Fiao continent was divided into two. In the ancient battlefield where Bai Ye's heart was partially manifested, the Middle-earth talisman Yu Xian and the withered bone-thrown great demon Bai Ying were fighting each other. One of the 14 thrones of the desolate world was confronting one of the 10 lords of Hauran. The talisman's puppets that formed soldiers from beans and the white bone army under his command were everywhere. This caused Bai Ye's heart to be in tatters. It was only supported by Yu Xian's tens of thousands of talisman puppets. This kind of celestial technique to mend heaven and earth could be said to be very powerful. In fact, it was even more difficult than creating a small heaven and earth. Bai Yi was still holding his sword, Tai Bai. With one slash, he cut down 5 thrones. When Yang Ji finally said where Bai Ye's 14 realms unification was located, it was the heart poem of this unrivaled Hauran poem. Almost at the same time, Bai Ying, who was in a small heaven and earth with the talisman Yu Xian, was sitting under the sword attendant Long Jian. He held the long sword that was refined from the soul of clairvoyance. He lightly shook the sword and a string of golden words trembled and turned into ashes. However, there was not a trace of spiritual energy in the world. Xia Yun helplessly held her forehead and said with a smile, "My dear mother, Sister Yang Ji, you finally saw it. But is this the problem now? Don't you want to guess how many poems and lines are left in Bai Ye's heart? 14 realms unification. It could be roughly divided into 3 types: timing, geographical, and human. Realms unification was a land of mountains and rivers. It belonged to geographical advantage. It was similar to the secondary sage and literary sage of the vast world. The Lotus Nunnery Master, the talisman Yu Xian, belonged to the time of Tao unification. It was related to the sun, moon, and stars that were unchanging and undisturbed by the river of time. Bai Ye's 14 realms unification belonged to human. In addition, if a sword cultivator wanted to reach the 14 realms, it was probably the same. Timing was not an extravagant hope. Geographical advantage was meaningless. Moreover, sword cultivators pursued the principle of, heaven and earth cannot restrain their sword. Why would they take the initiative to harmonize with the heaven and earth? Bai Yi did not stop attacking. Not only did it ignore the stagnation of the river of time, the sword light was untraceable. More importantly, it caused Bai Ye's spiritual energy to be consumed extremely slowly. No matter how many times he attacked, other than the spiritual energy consumed by the sword, the only thing that was truly consumed was the poems in his heart. A waterfall came from the heavens. The yellow river descended from the heavens and traveled to the East Sea. It landed in the mortal world and fiercely collided with the yellow formed by Yang Ji's great Tao. Huge waves surged to the heavens. In Bai Ye's painting of mountains and rivers, 10,000 li of land turned into a lake. Its momentum was not any weaker than the battle between Yang Ji and imperial concubine Fei. Bai Ye's sword slashed Yang Ji's Dharma image, which no longer maintained a human head, into 2. Yuan shows 10,000 Zhang true body charged over with his staff. He was only 100 li away from Bai Yi, becoming one of the sovereign great monsters closest to Bai Yi. Tai Bai's sword swept across. The young swordsman traveled, drinking and laughing, in the city of murder. The ranger Bai Yi. This time, Chia Yun could not avoid the young ranger's sword. In the next moment, Chia Yun had just closed his body when he found himself in the starry sky and night sky again. He smiled bitterly. Even he felt annoyed. The other sovereigns were probably even more determined and full of killing intent. In his dream, he rode by Lu to the mountains. There were 4,000 mountains, 32 peaks, and 1,000 maidens followed him in the sky. He sang the Zixia immortal scripture. Everyone, open the heavenly palace for me. The true spirit refined Yuqinqiu. The bridge walked on the rainbow. The banished immortals walked around the blue sky. Tai Bai Yi was boundless. The stars were lined up. He was drunk. He leaned on the ancient pine tree with his sword. Who knew that the Milky Way under his feet was so wide? He suddenly turned around and stretched out his hand to beckon Qing Tong with a smile, on another battlefield. The talisman Yu Xian did not need to roll up his sleeves to fight. Plus, buying was of a similar style. Therefore, Yu Xian taught buying a lot of common sayings. What do you mean by snatching something? Don't snatch a coffin. The frog wants life and the snake wants to be full. What do you mean by I'm a hairless bird? You're so huddling in the corner and snorting 3 times. Nonsense did not delay Yu Xian's important task. First, 2 golden talismen were quietly hidden among thousands of talismen of different grades. They hung at the east and west ends of the small world. They were the sun talisman and the moon talisman respectively. Finally, they turned into a bright talisman. The sun and the moon reflected each other's radiance. Their bright light illuminated the world. Therefore, there was a praise on the mountain. Once Yu Xian used this talisman, there was no need for the lantern-lighting talisman in the mortal world. However, the reason Yu Xian had taken out these 2 talismans was to confirm one thing. Was the flow of time in the Fuyao continent's heaven and earth restriction faster or slower? If there was indeed a difference in speed, then what was the exact difference? But even if the sun and the moon matched to form a bright talisman, he still could not find out. It was not easy and difficult to accurately see the scale of time in the many layers of restrictions and cages of the small worlds. The talisman Yu Xian threw out another 2 green talisman. He did 2 things at once. He chanted incantations. 1 sleeve, 2 worlds. He used the sun talisman and the arrow-leaking talisman. The sundials stop flowing. The starlight stops moving. The fragrance rain flows beside. The sweet dew hangs above. The sun's shadow appears in time. The flowing water settles at the moment. Urgent as the law commands. The light is in the candle. The water is in the arrow. Shining in the sky, the elites circle each other. The sky is completely white. The sun is small. The clouds break through the sky. Go! Yu Xian clenched his teeth and threw out another green talisman. It was the pavilion rising talisman that Yu Xian had created himself. There are no runes in the mountain. Immortals in the clear spring water stand 12 hibiscus leaves. They flow with the waves. They set the 12 hours. The sun's shadow is not different. Once the 3 talismans were thrown out, the great Tao was revealed in an instant. Although the 3 green talismans were burned to ashes in an instant, Yu Xian had already seen through the heavenly secrets with just a glance. He reminded Bai, be careful. The river of time flows in reverse. The talisman Yu Xian was suddenly speechless. It turned out that when the talisman Yu Xian shouted out his inner thoughts, 3 immortal swords had broken through the 3 layers of restrictions of the Fuyao continent. The 3 immortal swords had dispelled the talisman Yu Xian's words of be careful, the river of time, and flow in reverse. Not only that, the Chia Yun in Bai's heart also happened to smile at Bai and say, the proudest thing in the human world, Bai also lives up to his name. This Chia Yun obviously could not control the three immortal swords. However, Chia Yun could control the three layers of restrictions and the river of time. Therefore, even if the talisman Yu Xian saw through the heavenly secrets, he could not tell Bai a part of the truth. Bai also said, Jia Xing. The death substitution technique was in Bai Ying. However, the death substitution technique was in Chia Yun. Therefore, the current Chia Yun could be said to be alive or dead. Another heaven and earth, or another, true, human world. The four immortal swords gathered beside Bai. Bai also held a Tai Bai, Taoist scripture, naive, and 10,000 laws. The four swords killed the four sovereigns other than Bai Ying and Chia Yun. The four swords killed Wu Yu, Yang Ji, Yuan Shou, and Niu Dao. They could not be more dead. Chia Yun's figure dissipated. She did not suffer a single sword, but her great Dao disappeared. Zhou Mi smiled and said, using the sword of the future to kill the present. Bai can only go. Zhou Mi finally said, in the future, if you and I still have a chance, let's fight again. The sword slashed down. Bai did not hesitate to use the sword of the present to slash Chia Yun. Zhou Mi allowed the sword light to land on his body. The heaven and earth of the continent flipped, and the river of time was in chaos. Yang Ji and Yuan Shou looked at each other, as if they did not understand why they were still alive. Niu Dao and Wu Yu had solemn expressions as they looked at Bai Ying, whose great Dao had suddenly collapsed. The biggest question was where was Bai Yi? Moreover, why was Chia Yun's aura the same as Bai Ying's? It was like the great Dao was completely cut off, but it was also slightly connected. It was like Chia Yun had mysteriously turned into Zhou Mi. As for where the talisman Yu Xian and the four immortal swords went, it made the group of revived sovereigns even more confused. Then, how did Bai Yi kill Chia Yun and Bai Ying under Zhou Mi's nose? Lu Cha sheathed his sword with a complicated expression. There was no more 14th realm Bai Yi in the world. As for the immortal sword Tai Bai, apart from the sword sheath, the sword itself had been split into four and scattered all over the place. One of the Tai Bai sword tips went near the ruins of the inverted mountain. The grey-robed elder seemed to have been slapped on the head as he fell into the whirlpool beneath his feet. In the Middle-earth divine continent, Zhou Zi suddenly grabbed a blade-strengthening gourd from Lu Kai and kept one of the sword lights in the gourd. He returned the blade-strengthening gourd to Lu Kai and let this direct sword cultivator thank the scholar. 729, updated an hour late. Sorry. 23,000 words. Chen Pingan had seen 3 sword cultivators who called themselves swordsmen. The first was Alliance, then the Ghost House Valley's Puchang, and finally the bearded ranger beside him. The pressure Lu Cha gave Chen Pingan was greater than the dragon god, who had been his neighbor for many years. On one hand, Lu Cha's swordsmanship and sword intent were more profound. The dragon god's body was incomplete, so he had never returned to the peak of his realm. On the other hand, the dragon god was a human sword cultivator, while Lu Cha was a demon. Chen Pingan's Tao of Sowing, which carried his true name, had a mysterious relationship with Lu Cha. Lu Cha sized up the white-robed hermit with interest. His first disciple, Bamboo Box, had suffered at the hands of this young man before. That's good. It'll save him from overestimating himself and thinking that there are no more sword cultivators outside the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Chen Pingan did not move, but his robe turned red again. He asked, "How's Ascension City?" Lu Cha took out a flask of wine and drank a mouthful. He glanced at the young man who seemed to be moved and asked, "Do you still have the ability to care about others?" Chen Pingan nodded and said, "Indeed, I don't have the strength." The grey-robed dragon god had been killed by Sword Immortal Boss. Chen Qingdu had once said that the dragon god would die if he dared to take a step north of the city wall. That was the truth. It was a pity that Qin Pingan did not see the dragon god's death with his own eyes. However, Qin Pingan did not know what the sword tip was. Was it a sword from the dragon god that had never appeared? Or was it a relic left behind by Sword Immortal Boss? Based on the strange phenomenon from before, it seemed to have come from the gate of the inverted hanging mountain. However, who would throw a sword tip at the Great Wall of Sword Qi? If it was a traveling item, why did Sword Immortal Zhang Lu and the savage world not stop it? As for the grayish-white, tattered cotton cloth, it was wrapped around the sword tip. It was a clear proof of the dragon god's death. The remnants of the grey robe was similar to a sword cultivator's intrinsic flying sword that had been stripped away by a great divine power. Therefore, it was definitely not a magic robe. Boss Sword Immortal only wanted him to keep it properly and refine it with his heart. However, he didn't want him to refine it into a natal item. Instead, he wanted him to refine it into an external sword. He wanted to refine the sword tip into a long sword and the cotton cloth into a scabbard. When the time came, it should be a pretty good sword for a swordsman. Chen Pingan asked another question, is Lu Ji dead? Don't die, please don't die. Too many sword immortals from the Great Wall of Sword Qi had died. It was not easy for them to leave the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Lu Ji and the others, who had traveled far and wide with a clear conscience, should not have died just a few days later. Chen Pingan admired Lu Ji's temperament as a female great sword celestial, as well as the future of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Chen Pingan hoped that Lu Ji could live for thousands of years. Even if Lu Ji established her own sect in the vast realm and completely broke away from the Great Wall of Sword Qi and Ascension City, it would still be a good thing. The style of the founder of a sect would often determine the atmosphere of a sect for hundreds or even thousands of years. If there was a chance to meet Lu Ji again in the future, Chen Pingan's first sentence would be that Lu Ji was indeed a beauty. Whoever denied it, he would *ck their mother. Lu Cha said, no, Lu Ji is currently fighting with Yang Ji and Yuan Shou. However, your senior brother is near the battlefield. In addition, Xiao Chua had a good relationship with Lu Ji when he was a hidden officer. Lu Ji returning to the South Hassa continent is not a big problem. Chen Pingan immediately asked, Fuyao continent. Lu Cha said, I also fell into Mr. Zhou's trap. The immortal sword Tai Bai has been broken. However, the price of the wilderness was not small. Bai Ying and Xia Yun were sacrificed. After this battle, there would be more and more new faces for the 14 thrones of the wilderness. On the righteous world side, Xiao Chua's sword killed Sun Yuan of the Tongyi continent, Yao Jia killed Zhou Xinji of the Central Plains, Buying refined Wanyan Lao Jing of the Gold Armor continent, and a native ascendant of the Fuyao continent escaped with heavy injuries. He almost dropped 2 levels and barely managed to keep his immortal status. If Qi Tingji did not save him, he would have been carved on the city wall. He was now hiding in a small white porcelain cave in the Liuxia continent to recuperate. Chen Pingan seemed to be deep in thought. No wonder that sword tip was a part of the immortal sword Tai Bai. No wonder the dragon monarch flew over the city wall to stop the sword tip from approaching him. However, why would Bai Yi give this item to him? Moreover, it was the sword tip with the greatest killing power. The thrones of the wilderness had died one after another. The Lotus Nunnery Master, Huang Wan, Yao Jia, Bai Ying, and Xia Yun. Bai Yi, who was the pride of the human world, had died. Why was the battlefield at the Fuyao continent in the southwest instead of the Gold Armor continent, which was closer to the Central Plains? How did the Central Plains Confucian Temple plan this battle? However, it made sense. Bai Yi did not have a good relationship with the Confucian Temple. The Confucian Temple did not seem to have the right to tell Bai Yi what to do with his sword. Moreover, Chen Pingan did not have the ability to predict the situation in the Fuyao continent and the Gold Armor continent. He could only deduce from the words Zhou Shenji and Wanyan Lao Jing carved on the city wall. However, Lu Cha said that 2 king stage demons were killed, and Lu Cha followed the tip of Tai Bai's celestial sword. Did this mean that the battle that could be said to be the pinnacle of the human world was an unprecedented siege that would never be repeated in the future? Did the Confucian Temple and the Central Plains Divine Continent have a countermeasure? Did Lu Cha participate in this or not? Or did he use a divine ability like Cui Dong's reversal of mountains and rivers to send Lu Cha here? Did he kill Meng Chao to prevent any accidents? There were too many questions, but there were no answers. He did not know the truth because there were too few clues. Moreover, he could only believe 70 to 80% of Lu Cha's words. However, Chen Pingan was very clear about one thing. The more the wilderness world and the Jiazi camp wanted to eliminate half of the city wall, the better the situation in the world would be. At least the South Whirlpool continent and his hometown, the Aquarius continent, were still firmly defended. Otherwise, with half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi and an Earth Immortal sword cultivator like him, there was no need for Lu Cha, the 3rd highest thrones, to come here personally. Chen Pingan's body and soul were shattered by Lu Cha's sudden punch. Lu Cha did not use his sword. He only used the body of a sword cultivator to punch. Moreover, he was holding the wine pot with one hand. Chen Pingan could have blocked it, but he did not. He took the punch and gathered not far away. He was very confused and did not know what Lu Cha's intention was. The result of such a punch was the same as the result of the Dragon King's sword in the past. It could not kill Meng Chao, who had merged with half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. It could even be said that it was similar to the previous hidden officer Xiao Chua's punch. What Chen Pingan lacked the most now was precisely this kind of body tempering. However, Chen Pingan did not have any wishful thinking. He did not dare to be greedy for another punch from Lu Cha. Lu Cha drank a mouthful of wine and smiled. No wonder you could endure the Dragon King's sword so many times. The foundation of a martial body is very good. Sword many times. Damn it, the Dragon King had attacked 179 times. Chen Pingan asked, "How's the Ascension City?" He could not help but ask the same question again. Lu Cha answered, "The Ascension City has not only gained a firm foothold in the New World, but it is also the one who has expanded the most among the 5 major forces." Chen Pingan felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. Then, he sighed. Since Lu Cha answered all his questions, it seemed like his situation was not good. He was just a small Earth Immortal sword cultivator who could not go anywhere. Was it necessary to trouble Lu Cha to personally attack the Great Wall? As expected, Lu Cha smiled and said, "I'll attack you a few times when you ask me a few questions. So you can ask a few more questions. Anyway, as long as there are more than 3 strikes, the difference will not be big." Chen Pingan actually asked again, "Did Zhou Mi have an agreement with the Moon-Bearing Mountain's grand ancestor, so that Zhou Mi would not only be the mastermind behind the scenes, but also the person with the highest combat strength in the wilderness?" Lu Cha smiled and did not say anything. Chen Pingan said, "Including Bai Ying and Chia Yun. More like half." When I asked the 3rd time, Mr. Lu did not answer. When I asked the 2nd time, Mr. Lu was even worse. He asked a lie, so he only attacked once. Otherwise, if I continued to ask, Mr. Lu might owe me a few more strikes. Lu Cha no longer paid any attention to Chen Pingan. He casually used Earth-Shrinking Mountain and River and walked on the city wall of this half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Chen Pingan had always been following this swordsman who used to be the 3rd highest sovereign. Lu Cha squatted down and placed his hand on one of the city walls. He pressed down lightly and quickly stood up and went to another place. Lu Cha said casually to the white-robed official beside him, "I'll just take it as I owe you 2 swords. You only need to attack 20 times. After that, I'll attack again." As Lu Cha spoke, he looked around. The world changed and the sword aura became strict. Lu Cha drank a mouthful of wine and smiled, "You're really not polite." Lu Cha threw a pot of wine, "All right, I was just scaring you. I also said it on purpose for the old blind man to hear. Zhou Mi wanted me to use you as bait to lure the old blind man to come here and die." Lu Cha had already been told by Zhou Mi about the greater good of the world. In addition, the grand ancestor of Mount Tuiyue had ordered him to be reasonable. After going against his will once, he would not attack a young man on the Great Wall of Sword Qi again. However, Lu Cha did not mind attacking an old blind man of the 14th realm. As long as the old blind man left the 100,000 mountains, Lu Cha would attack with all his might. The wine pot did not fall to the ground. Instead, its whereabouts were uncertain and it suddenly appeared everywhere. As for the young official, he was nowhere to be seen. Lu Cha smiled. This kid was so cautious that it seemed like he was too thorough. On the opposite wall, Li Zhen stood up with a puzzled expression. Zhou Mi suddenly appeared and smiled, "You should thank me for causing the river of time to deviate slightly from its original riverbed." Li Zhen sighed, "In the end, I'm the fool." Zhou Mi shook his head. "In my early years, when I was flipping through the old almanac on Mount Tuiyue, I always believed that among the ancient sword cultivators, regardless of whether they had died in battle or survived, their clairvoyance had been underestimated. You should have a place in that riverside meeting. However, I don't think anyone would be willing to have an existence that seemed to be waiting for someone at the lower reaches of the river of time by their side. Back then, I had calculated many outcomes for you, including how you could save yourself and how you could survive until you reached a further ferry. However, it was difficult for me to come up with a foolproof plan. The pleasant surprise was that I was inspired. Thus, I came up with this plan to kill you." However, the person I had envisioned back then was the Sage of Rites, who had crashed into the vast world from outer space with many ancient gods. Once we succeed, there will be no more little teacher in this world. Bai Zhe might change his mind. Li Zhen frowned. Bai Zhe has an extremely good relationship with the Sage of Rites. Will he completely rebel against the wild world because of this? Zhou Mi smiled. Victory and defeat are uncertain. It's difficult to help either side. However, when the wild world has a 60% chance of winning, Bai Zhe will only have one choice, be it for the sake of fewer deaths in the vast world or for the wild world to gain a foothold. Direct and efficient. Only when the world is stabilized will there be a chance to recuperate. Of course, before that, I will definitely take the initiative to look for Bai Zhe and agree to some things. Zhou Mi turned his head to look at the 100,000 mountains in the far south. He smiled. Bai Zhe of the demon race speaks for the vast world. Jia Xing of the human race seeks power for the wild world. Do you think there is a more suitable natural ally than us? Li Zhen said, "It's a pity that it didn't work out." Zhou Mi said, "It's indeed a pity." Li Zhen sighed. Jia Xing's methods are really insidious. Zhou Mi smiled. Overt schemes can be used. If one can use an overt scheme like an overt scheme, one can be considered a master of the art of war. Therefore, when Hai Zhou Mi had always been considered to be at the peak of the ascendant realm at most. He was a sovereign with a very high ranking but relatively weak combat power. The great demon Buying of the Withered Bones throne almost never fought with other sovereigns or ascendant realms. He liked to sneak around and scheme. He especially targeted those great demons who were secretly recuperating. It was rumored that he refined them into puppets. Therefore, although Bai Ying's combat power was not high, he was famous for his deep family background and shrewdness. Bai Ying not only had the sword attendant Long Jian transformed from the dragon monarch's head, but also the long sword refined from a part of the remnant soul. Bai Ying's actions could really be said to be unrestrained. Li Zhen was quite helpless and felt powerless. He squatted down again and sighed. Even if Li Zhen's life-flying sword was the river of time, he did not dare to say that what he saw was the truth. Many times, seeing a part of the truth made people think that they were infallible. However, the more self-righteous an ordinary person was, the easier their life was. It was the same on the mountain and under the mountain. Li Zhen was an exception. Li Zhen suddenly remembered something and almost laughed to tears. It was said that in history, the great demon Bai Ying once asked Wen Hai Zhou if he wanted to be the lord of culture and education in the wilderness. Zhou seemed to have just smiled and said, "Not enough." Li Zhen raised his head and stared at the scholar in a green scholar's robe in a daze. "Were scholars so scary?" Zhou just quietly waited for the old blind man's choice. The old blind man was still the same. As long as the old blind man did not leave the mountain, Zhou would not go to the 100,000 mountains. Zhou laughed in his heart. "Li Zhen, think about it. When you think it through, go to the Tongyi continent to find me. If you don't think it through, it's okay. You can just stay in the old wilderness." During the Fuyao continent battle, in order to kill Bai Yi, apart from using all kinds of methods, Zhou also paid a price. That was half of Bai Ying's and half of Qian's Daos. The former came from the wilderness, while the latter came from the vast world. In the conversation between the young hidden official and Lu Chao, he accidentally revealed the truth, but it was actually a guess. How to guess it was very simple. Put yourself in the scholar's shoes and imagine that the scholar was full of evil tricks. You might as well use the greatest evil to guess the intentions of others, and think of all the methods as thorough and meticulous as possible. There were actually a few clues. For example, the death of the master of the Lotus Nunnery. If the great ancestor of Mount Tuiyue and Qin Qing were superior in terms of Daos and could not make a move, then as the hidden official of the wilderness, Zhou should have at least stopped them. He should not have watched Elder Dong kill the big demon with his sword and drag a bright moon into the human world. As for how Zhou convinced Qian, Li Zhen could not guess. Zhou seemed to have guessed Li Zhen's doubts and took the initiative to dispel them. In my big picture, the sword cultivator Firen is an extremely important existence, far more important than the likes of Kuiyu and Yuxi. Zhou then said something that made Li Zhen's heart tremble. Clairvoyance is the same. In my heart, it is second only to Firen. Therefore, the clairvoyance of all the remnant souls has always been under my control. Zhou then said, annoyed. Is there a need? Li Zhen, who has been complaining on the city wall for so many years, do you really not want to leave the riverbed constraints of the river of time and not be a sword cultivator clairvoyance anymore? Zhou pointed at the battlefield where Qin Qing killed the dragon monarch. Yes. On this city wall, there were once judicial officers and hidden officials. In the past, Jia Sheng was even the former judicial officer. Even earlier, in the ancient heavenly court, there were sword-bearers and armor-bearers. However, Bai Yi actually gave a sword to Firen, which made Zhou a little unhappy. He needed to divert his attention to kill a big accident. In the past, although Firen did not have the title of teacher and student, Zhou taught Firen much more diligently than the direct disciples like Shi Qin and Lu Bai. In fact, there were only 3 people left in Firen's sect. Under the arrangement of the great ancestor of Mount Tuiyue, they were already Zhou's chess pieces. Zhou originally planned to appear as Firen's teacher, in a sense one day, and return half of Firen's senior brother Qian to make Firen follow him wholeheartedly and walk towards the seemingly endless path together. Would there be Li Zhen and Yuxi behind the two of them? Shoal Current followed from afar. In the past, at Mount Tuoyue, Zhou found the great ancestor of the wilderness, who had been recuperating for 6,000 years. Zhou proposed 3 plans to him. The first was that the Great Wall of Sword Qi flew up and landed on the 5th world. Otherwise, Savage World would have suffered far fewer casualties in the battle at the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The second was that embroidered tiger Chui Dong swallowed a continent and stopped the demons of Tongyi continent from going up north. Apart from that, when the 14th realm Bai Yi attacked, the temple head helped out from both sides and watched from the sidelines. Of course, there was also the young man next door who was the hidden official. Otherwise, Zhou plan would have been completed long ago. He would have broken through the southwest Fuyao continent and attacked the weak southeast Tongyi continent. He would have attacked the weakest Aquarius continent and taken down the weakest North continent. He would have taken down the weakest North continent and the weakest continent. After that, he would have confronted the Central Plains Divine continent, Drifting Dawn continent, and South Swirling continent. During this period, he would have returned Fuyao continent to the Central Plains Confucian Temple. However, the wilderness would have taken Fuyao continent and Golden Armor continent in the end. However, as long as Zhou took down Aquarius continent, it would be a major turning point. The most interesting thing about the 3 plans was that the wilderness's plan was the complete opposite of Zhou great Tao. Zhou did not hide anything from the gray-robed elder. The latter laughed heartily. Not only did he not kill Haoran Jiaxing with a slap, he allowed Zhou to do whatever he wanted. Thousands of years later, Jiaxing became Zhou and Zhou became Bai Ying. As for the war at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Zhou had been secretly plotting. Outside the ruins of the Moon Palace, the talisman Yuxian sat on the ground dejectedly. He held the Tai Bai scabbard that Bai Yi asked him to return to the Dexian-Du temple. The old man laughed and said, "Damn it, I don't want to be a hero anymore." However, the old man quickly stroked his beard and laughed, "To hell with the 14th realm, I feel great." He looked down and saw that his snow-white beard was stained with blood. He stroked his beard as if he was pulling it. He started to curse Jiaxing again. After cursing, Yuxian wanted to get up and leave this place. However, he did not expect another page to appear out of nowhere and land in front of Yuxian. The old man stretched out his hand and grabbed. He was dragged far away. It was as if the talisman Yuxian was about to be brought into the vast galaxy by a page of a book. There was a poem on it. The stars were bright, as if they were out of the world. There was also a sentence that seemed to be a side note. The talisman Yuxian merged with the Tao here. Yuxian stood on the talisman that was suddenly as big as a boat. It was as if the great Tao was traveling far away and an immortal was riding a boat in the sea of stars. Yuxian cupped his fists. There were ripples in his heart lake. Yuxian's immortal energy is vast. Yuxian laughed and said, "The Holy Master is too kind, too kind." At the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Zhou opened the restriction of the small world and stepped into the caged bird on the opposite side. Zhou could not help but laugh. The 2 swordsmen seemed to be on different sides of the world as they drank their wine. Lu Cha got up first and broke the restriction of the caged bird. He returned to the vast South Whirlpool continent. According to Zhou since they had already taken down the 3 continents, the next thing they had to do was to take down the South Whirlpool continent and the Eastern Bottle continent at the same time. The battlefield of the Whirlpool continent would be handed over to Lu Cha. Only Q-Sword and Chen Chunan would be needed. There was no need to care about the rest. Chen Pingon stood up and said with a smile, "It's not easy to kill the old blind man, right?" Zhou looked around and nodded, "It's harder to kill him than Master Hidden Official." Chen Pingon kept the wine pot in his sleeve and asked, "How can I kill Bai Yi?" Zhou did not answer the question. "You are a sword cultivator, but you can't see Bai Yi use his sword." It's a pity. Chen Pingan said, Bai Yi can see me use my sword in the future. Zhou Mi smiled. The young hidden official's words sounded very heroic. If ordinary people heard it, they would only think that it was a young man who was arrogant and didn't even put Bai in his eyes. However, Zhou Mi knew that this was the same principle that the scholar Chen Pingan and the scholar Hao Ran Jiaxing had said. Unfortunately, people are often disappointed. But I still have to not let others down. Zhou Mi looked at this homeless dog who was boasting shamelessly. He was very patient and said slowly, that's because a person has never been really disappointed. Chen Pingan narrowed his eyes and said slowly, there was once a little girl who was fleeing for her life. She saw her mother hiding from her husband and daughter and secretly eating steamed buns. The little girl just looked at that scene numbly. Do you think she was not disappointed? Was she not desperate? It can be changed. It can be changed. Is it great to be a scholar? Will the disappointment be greater? I don't think so. Zhou Mi shook his head and said, it's a good principle, but it's still too small. The young hidden official suddenly laughed, of course. I'm young and lacking in knowledge. How can I compare to Zhou Mi when high? Dao. Reason. Zhou Mi put his hands behind his back. How many copies of yourself do you have to kill before you can truly accept your fate and change the world step by step? Chen Pingan was expressionless. Zhou Mi's figure had already disappeared. Even the intrinsic flying sword-caged sparrow did not notice his arrival and departure. Chen Pingan took out a talisman to confirm whose world he was in. Zhou Mi appeared behind Chen Pingan and laughed, how did you become a hidden official when you're so timid? Chen Pingan put away the talisman. Zhou Mi said, I'm looking forward to your martial 10 realms vigor. Chen Pingan was silent. On the great wall of sword qi outside the two worlds, the sword immortal heroic spirits that had walked out of the painting began to take up formation. They could wear down as much of Zhou Mi's Tao as possible. Zhou Mi laughed, you only reached the peak after your golden core was shattered again and again. What about your nascent soul? Why don't you use the fall of a qi refinement warrior to exchange for the limit of a pure martial artist? Chen Pingan took a deep breath. If there was no other way, he would give up half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. This was Chen Pingan's final trump card. He would use his life and half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi to exchange for a sovereign's Tao. Actually, the value of half of the Great Wall of Sword Qi was still extremely high. This trade was not worth it, but it was extremely interesting. Who would be willing to exchange their Tao for a sovereign great demon? The dragon god was probably the most willing, but he was still trying to confirm if his boss, the sword immortal, had a backup plan. Zhou Mi seemed to be confirming the young hidden official's determination. In the end, Zhou Mi disappeared in a flash. He first removed the restrictions of the world before breaking the sparrow-caged sparrow. Before returning to the Tongya continent, Zhou Mi used his sword qi to carve the words Bai Yi on the city wall. Not only that, Zhou Mi even removed the mountain and river restrictions of the Jiazi tent, allowing the young hidden official to see the light of day again. Chen Pingan appeared at the edge of the cliff. On the other side was Li Zhen. With the death of the dragon god, only Li Zhen, the 100-sword immortal of the moon-supporting mountain, was left on that half of the great wall of sword qi. They looked at each other from afar. Li Zhen's expression was complicated. He seemed to be smiling. Chen Pingan asked, "Are you so happy to eat sh*t?" Li Zhen asked, "Share some with you." Chen Pingan nodded and said, "Give it to me." Li Zhen was stunned on the spot. He asked doubtfully, "Chen Pingan, have you been crazy since you were young?" Chen Pingan said, "A hungry dog is not afraid of a stick. You are like a chicken in a flock of cranes. Li Zhen looked at the vast land in the south and then turned to look at the gate in the north. Finally, he retracted his gaze and looked at Chen Pingan. He said, "Let's go." Chen Pingan said, Li Zhen, clairvoyance is clairvoyance, Li Zhen is clairvoyance, clairvoyance is Li Zhen. Is it important? Pei Qian was about to say something, but Li Baoping pulled his sleeve. Pei Qian scratched his head and took over the extremely precious paper cutter. He did have some belongings. If he didn't have something close to him, he would have a headache about how to bring it home. He couldn't always owe Sister Zaishi something close to him. He said he would return it to her after leaving the Jinjia continent. Then the old scholar said he had to leave for Sui Mountain. From beginning to end, the old scholar didn't say the name of the child wearing the tiger head hat. After the old scholar left, Li Baoping and Pei Qian also left the Yu family. Li Baoping wanted to return to the academy. The students of the Cliff Academy were studying there. Pei Qian had finally returned home after traveling for many years. But they had to cross the continent to reach the Baifeng continent and then take a detour to the North Lu continent before returning to the Baoping continent. Li Baoping gave the narrow knife to Pei Qian and left with the blade-strengthening gourd hanging from her waist. Pei Qian stood at the door and called out to Sister Baoping. Li Baoping turned around and smiled brightly. She stomped her feet lightly and waved her hands quickly. Pei Qian scratched his head. In the end, he didn't have the nerve to be so childish. Pei Qian stood at the door for a long time before returning to the residence. She first asked a steward to help her inform the Yu family's patriarch if she could thank him and bid him farewell. The steward agreed with a smile. After Pei Qian met the Yu family's patriarch, she went to bid farewell to Yu Zhuanfu. Yu Zhuanfu wanted to send her to the immortal fairy. Pei Qian brought along the unnamed disciple named Da Man. When Yu Zhuanfu arrived at the ferry, he suddenly had an idea. He said, "Since Pei Qian is going to Leigong Temple, I also want to go there and see if I can ask Senior Pei Xiangpei about fish techniques." The Yu family's patriarch stood in a pavilion in the private garden with a plaque that read, "Wood Fox." Beside Yu Panshui stood a handsome young man in white. Yu Panshui grinned and rubbed his hands. "Thanks to Brother Qi, I'm lucky that old Shotsai didn't hit me too hard today." This young master, who was temporarily a guest of the Yu family, was Qi Tingji. In the mountain water cave of the Fuyao continent, he couldn't save Zhou Shenji. Fortunately, he later killed Wanyan Laojing in the Jinjia continent. Although that Ascendant Realm cultivator most likely didn't die completely, this battle merit fell on this old sword immortal of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. As for that Ascendant Realm cultivator of the Fuyao continent, he was extremely grateful to Qi Tingji. He made an appointment with Qi Tingji to find a place to drink when he came out of seclusion in the white porcelain grotto heaven of the Liuxia continent. Old Sword Immortal referred to Qi Tingji's cultivation years. Although the words were carved on the city wall, Qi Tingji's appearance was extremely young. Qi Tingji first rose to fame in the Central Plains Divine Continent, then became famous throughout the continent. However, Qi Tingji disappeared without a trace. There were rumors that the Lu family's wealth god of the White Snow continent wanted to invite Qi Tingji to be the family's grand consecrator. The Lu family's wealth was definitely beyond imagination, so Qi Tingji was now the Lu family's guest of honor. The merit accumulated from the war between the two continents was enough for Qi Tingji to establish a sect in the vast heavens. However, Qi Tingji was still hesitant. Once he took root in the vast heavens and established an ancestral hall as the founder, it was equivalent to giving up on Ascension City and the Fifth Continent. The two gates of the Fuyao continent and the Tongya continent hadn't lasted for many years. The vast heavens news about Ascension City was almost completely blank. Do you think that people's hearts and reputation are like money? Greasy, greasy. You're so young and old, yet you're so greasy. Within the rules, I ask my heart and I do my own thing. Didn't you go to the Great Wall of Sword Chi for you Zhuanfu? Are you disheartened and retreating in the face of difficulties, or are you still unwilling to give up and want to cast a long line to catch a big fish? This question is not easy to answer. You either have to admit that you have ulterior motives, or you have to admit that your master's heart is too dirty. Every move placed outside the chessboard is a dirty move. So why don't I help you find a reason? Wouldn't that make you more refined? The old man held a jade handle that was as cold as congealed fat. It was thinly carved and very shallow. There were only 2 engravings that were deeper. They were both seal styles. One was the word jade and the other was the word cut. Exhaling, he clenched it with both hands and gently twisted it. Then, he habitually rubbed it against his face. Lin Junbai turned a blind eye to this. You Zhuanfu doesn't like me. I'm not suitable for you Qingqing. Yu Panshui sneered. Silly girl, how did you like Chen Pingan? Lin Junbai asked back, why did you Zhuanfu not like the hidden official? Yu Panshui narrowed his eyes. He raised his wrist and gently grasped it. In the next moment, a seal appeared in his palm. He pinched it between 2 fingers. The words on the side of the seal read, a stone in a stream, how can it not be a mainstay? Beautiful clouds in the sky, fist still in the sky. The seal read, a female martial god, by Qin Chao's side. Yu Panshui asked, you lost to this person in chess. Do you know who he is? Lin Junbai said, it's good that Mr. Yu knows. Yu Panshui raised the other jade handle in his hand. Curse this guy a few times and I'll give this to you. Heaven, earth, you, and I know. If I don't say anything, you won't say anything. What are you afraid of? Let me remind you, this handle in my hand is an old item from Shui Hua Garden. It's equivalent to half of Shui Hua Garden. Not to mention you, even your husband won't dislike it. This item came from Lao King Blessed Land. This kind of strange stone, Tian Huang, was the essence of Lao King Blessed Land's mountain root. It was a unique item of Blessed Land. It was priceless. 1 tael of Lao King stone was 1 tael of grain rain money. There was also a saying, half of the world's seals and inkstones came from Lao King Blessed Land. It was a famous first-class blessed land with rolling in money. It was controlled by a sect under the Xian Mountain Talisman. The talisman Yu Xian had 5 sects in 1 mountain. He had 1 first-class blessed land, 1 small grotto heaven, and 2 medium-class blessed lands. Among them, the Cloud Dream Grotto Heaven had the Green Grass Lake. Just the Flood Dragon Grotto Heaven alone had several Flood Dragon Grotto caves and countless aquatic monsters. What was rarer was that they were naturally docile and were most liked by the fairies on the mountain. Thanks to the chaotic mountain and river gazettes in the vast world, the fairies selected many must-have items on the mountain, such as the dragon fairy dress, the pearl of the palm bracelet with 12 dragon beads, a dressing mirror made by the Luli Pavilion in White Emperor City, a copy of a cloud sticker or a flower sticker that was known as a second-class authentic work, a jade spring bottle from Lu Xia continent with a branch of plum blossoms from Baihua Blessed Land. How could Yu Xian not be rich? How could the talisman not be rich? Even Yu Panshui, who controlled the treasury of the Xianmi dynasty, was ashamed of his inferiority. At this moment, the god of wealth Lu of the Snow-White Continent who appeared in his garden once took the initiative to offer a price. He wanted to buy half of Lao King Blessed Land from the talisman Yu Xian. It was said that at that time, Lu Jubao carried a pile of things with him, which was full of Guyu money. In addition to the mountain of immortal money, the Lu family was also willing to take out half of their tree-shade blessed land and give it to Yu Xian. Yu Xian did not agree. So what if you, Lu Jubao, are rich? But do I look like a person who lacks money? In the end, half of Lao King blessed land, half of Tree Shade blessed land, and Lu Jubao giving money to Yu Xian were all superficial. It was similar to a marriage alliance between the aristocratic families at the foot of the mountain. In fact, the Lu family of the Snow-White continent just wanted to hug another thigh. Of course, both sides could indeed make a lot of money in the long run. One side was making money and the other side was losing money. It would not last long. It was just a flowing road of wealth. It would go when one said it would, and it would disappear when one said it would. Lin Junbai seemed to have a script in mind. Without hesitation, as if she was reciting a script, she really scolded Cui Dongshan. Yu Panshui laughed and was very happy. He threw the handle to Lin Junbai. Lin Junbai put it in her sleeve and said, "It's a pity that I can't open the stone into a square stamp." Yu Panshui turned his head and said, "Go back and tell that Xiao Hu." A cold voice sounded, "This servant accepts the order." Lin Junbai did not look sideways from beginning to end, turning a deaf ear. There were too many rumors about this Yu family's ancestor. His temperament was just one of them. Yu Panshui suddenly asked, "That young hidden official, can he really make you, Lin Junbai, admire him?" Lin Junbai nodded and said, "I can't, but my heart yearns for him." Yu Panshui laughed and said, "Let's talk around." Lin Junbai said, "Winning or losing is all up to Mr. Yu." Yu Panshui shook his wrist and put the seal back in place. He stood up and said, "Let's go to Gall Cypress Pavilion to kill a round. This kid's tone is really big, as if he can beat me." At the ferry port of the capital city, Pei Qian and Yu Zhuanfu took an immortal ferry to the White Snow continent. A man stood by the railing of the observation deck, watching in a daze as the magnificent capital city grew to the size of a palm, the size of a mustard seed, and finally disappeared. Pei Qian asked, "You first make up for yesterday's practice, or else you'll have to pay me back for a piece of snow." The child just stood on his tiptoes and kept looking at the distant land. Pei Qian was not angry, nor did he scold him. He just said, "According to the agreement, if you don't practice for 2 consecutive days, you'll pay me back half of the snow. If you don't practice for a total of 3 days, you'll pay me back all of it." Only then did the child say vaguely, "Let's watch a little longer." Chen Lingjun finally arrived at the mouth of the Great Blasphemy near the Spring Dew Garden. He successfully left the suppression and restraint of a continent's mountains and rivers. She could not help but glance at the young Qi refinement warrior on the sea. Although she appeared calm on the surface, she was actually scared. It was not better than meeting a mortal fire dragon. A dragon slayer. Wouldn't it be easier to kill the water descendants? Chen Lingjun was very smart. He casually found an excuse and cursed the treacherous water situation here with that brother. Soon, they started calling each other brothers. He did not expect that brother's surname was also Qin and his name was Zhuliu. This name was similar to his good brother, Bai Jun. Moreover, it was obvious that he was a person who failed in the imperial examinations. Chen Lingjun laughed heartily. "Your surname is Chen and mine is Chen. Aren't we brothers from the same family 500 years ago?" Chen Zhuliu smiled slightly. Previously, he found a fragmented secret realm and casually found an immortal's remains. He then returned the previous skin to the young coachman from the North Continent. The coachman worked for nothing and received a bag of immortal money. Chen Lingjun exchanged it for a successful desecration, instead of failing at the last step and working for nothing. If the desecration went smoothly and the heavy rain attacked the 2 shores, it would not be difficult for Chen Lingjun to reach the pure Jade realm. He would not have the current nascent soul realm and would have the embryonic form of a true dragon. However, Chinjuliu might not be able to hold it in and return the money first before cutting off his good brother's head. Moreover, if Chen Lingjun chose to crash into the boat and kill the passers-by in order to achieve a higher level of Dao achievement, then Chinjuliu would not have to worry about it and save energy. Chen Lingjun felt that he wasn't the kind of person who would randomly acknowledge someone as his brother. He bade farewell to Chinjuliu, mainly because he wanted to quickly thank Li Yuan and Duke Lingyuan before finding Bai Huan and returning home together. On the way back, Chen Lingjun went to the Dragon Palace Grotto Heaven to thank his good brother Li Yuan, and then strolled around the Spring Dew Garden. However, he did not meet Chinjuliu, who was squatting at the Spring Dew Garden Ferry and eating tortoise jelly. Such a coincidence, it would be a pity not to make friends with him. As a result, they hit it off even more. Chinjuliu took out an old money pouch and pretended to treat him to a meal, which made Chen Lingjun feel sad. He heard that Chinjuliu wanted to go to the Ghost Valley to try his luck, because the Upper Five Realms' heroic spirit in the capital city was gone, so opportunities were everywhere. Chen Lingjun heard that Chinjuliu was going to the Ghost Valley to try his luck, because the Upper Five Realms' heroic spirit in the capital city was now gone, so opportunities were everywhere. Chen Lingjun heard that Chinjuliu was going to the Ghost Valley to try his luck, because the Upper Five Realms' heroic spirit in the capital city was now gone, so opportunities were everywhere. Chen Lingjun heard that Chinjuliu was going to the Ghost Valley to try his luck, because the Upper Five Realms' heroic spirit in the capital city was now gone, so opportunities were everywhere. Chen Lingjun heard that Chinjuliu was going to the Ghost Valley to try his luck, because the Upper Five Realms' heroic spirit in the capital city was now gone, so opportunities were everywhere. Chen Lingjun heard that Chinjuliu was going to the Ghost Valley to try his luck, because the Upper Five Realms' heroic spirit in the capital city was now gone, so opportunities were everywhere. Chen Lingjun heard that Chinjuliu was going to the Ghost Valley to try his luck. Li Yuan stood at the shore of Great Blasphemy and looked at the ferry. Suddenly, he was shocked. He saw the blue-robed scholar standing on the railing smiling at him. Shen Lin immediately bowed, and Chinjuliu turned and left. After strolling through the Skeleton Beach, Chen Lingjun persuaded Chinjuliu not to go to the Ghost Valley to be a wild cultivator, but to follow him to the Aquarius continent to eat and drink. However, when they arrived at the Spring Dew Gardens ferry, Chinjuliu suddenly said that he would go to the Oxhorn Mountains ferry later. Chen Lingjun agreed to meet him at Luolpa Mountain and went south alone. When they arrived at the Oxhorn Mountains ferry, Chen Lingjun could not help but wipe away a lot of bitter tears. After hanging the sword talisman, Chen Lingjun arrived at his own mountain gate. When he saw Chao Qinglang, Chen Lingjun laughed loudly and strode towards Chao Qinglang. "Qinglang, I haven't seen you for a few years, but your realm is still climbing like an ant. This won't do." Chao Qinglang stood in place and nodded gently, smiling without saying a word. Chen Lingjun laughed and asked, "In the years that I wasn't in Luolpa Mountain, did anyone bully you? Tell me, now it's just a matter of Brother Chen slapping you." Chao Qinglang shook his head, "Never." Chen Lingjun was slightly disappointed, but he quickly started to climb the mountain. He did not seats in Yuanji, he was not diligent in walking. But Chen Lingjun quickly saw the young lady in black who was patrolling the mountain. His face stiffened, he held back his laughter and stood in place with his walking stick. Using the melon seeds as hidden weapons, he jumped and twisted his waist, shouting, "Let's go," he threw out a hidden weapon. Patrolling the mountain, "Let's go," he beat the flowers and trees to the point that they could not retaliate. Pei Qian had not returned from his travels, and the right law protector was truly invincible in Luolpa Mountain. Chen Lingjun coughed, "Xiao Meili." Zhou Meili was stunned on the spot, then hugged the golden carrying pole and walking stick. She ran all the way to Chen Lingjun's side and shouted, "Jingqing, Jingqing, Jingqing." Hearing this name that could only be heard in Luopa Mountain, Chen Lingjuan's eyes turned red. Xiao Mili said timidly, "Were you bullied? Who was it? If they can beat me, then they can beat me. I'm not afraid to go down the mountain." Chen Lingjun laughed and patted Xiao Mili's head. He bent down and asked, "Master hasn't returned home yet?" Zhou Mili nodded. "The road is so long, the good mountain lord will definitely walk slower." Chen Lingjun nodded. Chen Lingjun let Xiao Mili lead the way to find Qin Wanshu, that silly girl. He first went to Ji Se Peak's ancestral hall to burn incense. Along the way, Xiao Mili told some stories about her family, and finally whispered, "The good mountain lord's senior brother, great sword immortal, misunderstood you at first, worried that you would bully Sister Wanshu." The little girl did not notice that the high-spirited Uncle Qin. At this moment, his teeth were chattering, and he asked with a trembling voice, left and right?" Sui Yuyu simply stopped talking. Pei Qian asked, "Sister Sui, do you know why among the 4 people in the painting, I have a good relationship with Old Chef, Old Wei, and Little White, but only with you?" Sui Yuyu began to frown. Pei Qian answered his own question, "Because my master is not the teacher in your heart. Don't think that my master will become that person one day." Sui Yuyu said with an indifferent expression, "You want to ask the sword-worshipping platform?" Pei Qian said, "Why not? It's just a spar. It won't kill anyone." Zhu Lian sighed and appeared outside the wooden door. He did not enter and only said, "Pei Qian, don't be so aggressive. We are all family. Even if you have resentment, you shouldn't use your fists before reason." Pei Qian did not turn his head. "Are you my master?" Zhu Lian was speechless. Difficult, it was really difficult. In fact, Zhu Lian knew that this day would come, but he did not expect it to come so early. The worst way was to use his fists to stop Pei Qian. The best way was to block the disaster for Sui Yuyu and not fight back. Then, he might be beaten up by Pei Qian and Sui Yuyu. There was a good way. A woman in a snow-white robe appeared beside Zhu Lian. Pei Qian hesitated and turned to cup his fists. Chang Ming said, "When the fist technique is good, the reason is great. You are worthy of being the first disciple of Luopa Mountain Lord." Pei Qian narrowed his eyes. Chang Ming looked casual and sneered, "Your master asked me to pass a message to you. You can save anything but chestnuts to eat. It's up to you whether to listen or not. I just need to pass the message." Pei Qian was skeptical. Chang Ming seemed to have recalled something. Your master added, "Don't run too fast." Pei Qian suddenly felt guilty and subconsciously scratched his head. She sat on a small bamboo chair under the eaves and looked at Old Chef, wanting to say something but hesitated. Zhu Lian smiled and waved his hand, indicating that Pei Qian did not need to take it to heart. Anyway, this Sui Yuyu was not easy to deal with even if he wanted to. He was also an eyesore. Chang Ming said, "I will help you remember what happened at the sword prayer platform today with the Mountain Lord." Pei Qian nodded, likewise. Zhu Lian and Chang Ming left together. Sui Yuyu asked, "Pei Qian, let's not talk about our grudges for now. What is going on with your state of mind?" If Pei Qian visited the sword prayer platform today and acted shamelessly or slyly like little charcoal, it would have been fine if Sui Yuyu borrowed the sword. The infatuation sword was, as Pei Qian said, lent to her by Chen Pingan. As the first disciple, not to mention borrowing it for 3 years, it was reasonable for Pei Qian to take it back. Pei Qian crossed his arms and said, "You already know the answer." There was only one bamboo chair in the cottage. It was clear that Sui Yuyu did not welcome any disturbances at the sword prayer platform. So when Pei Qian sat on the chair, Sui Yuyu could only stand. But Pei Qian finally looked a little familiar. Sui Yuyu laughed. Pei Qian had actually started to doze off. But after a while, Sui Yuyu sighed in his heart. What a sleeping body but not sleeping spirit. Was Pei Qian in the far travel realm or the peak realm? Pei Qian's fist intent seemed to be still sleeping, but he had already opened his eyes and spoke. The 5th day of the 5th month at Calligraphy Lake is an unusual day. Sister Sui, you are now a sword cultivator of the True Realm sect. You should know, right? Sui Yuyu nodded and said, if I remember correctly, Chen Pingan was born on the 5th day of the 5th month. You can call him Pei Qian, your master. Don't call my master by his name. Pei Qian reminded him and then took out a bag of stir-fried chestnuts and a foreign snack called 5 poison pancake. The centipedes, toads, and scorpions on the pancake were all made with wooden molds. If I didn't sleepwalk to the ground, I wouldn't even know. Pei Qian asked, Sister Wanchu would throw things around. Zhou Mili immediately corrected herself. Jingqing, Jingqing. Maybe it's Jingqing. He said that he treats money like dirt. It must be Jingqing who ate so many of your fried chestnuts and was too embarrassed to give you money, so he secretly came over to give you money. Sigh, Jingqing was just being kind. It's my fault for not guarding the door well. Pei Qian jumped down from the wall and brought Xiao Mili back to the bamboo house. They sat by the cliff together. In the end, the little girl in black was really tired. She lay on the young woman's lap and fell asleep. The sky turned white. First, it was the light of rice grains. Then, it shone brightly. After Pei Qian left, Zhu Lian got the bamboo paper cutter and immediately went to the accountant's office to find Wei Wenlong. He calculated the value of the items in Pei Qian's paper cutter. However, Wei Wenlong's realm was not high enough, so he couldn't determine the rank and price of some magic treasures with unknown origins and strict restrictions on the mountain. He was worried that they would be sold at a low price at Oxhorn Mountain's ferry and then be picked up by outsiders on the mountain. Even if Luopa Mountain eventually chose to keep it for themselves, they couldn't not know how rare it was. If they just left it there to collect dust, it would make Wei Wenlong's Dao heart unstable. Everything had to have a definite price to make Wei Wenlong feel at ease. As for whether they would sell it for money or keep it for a high price in the end, it was not important. What Wei Wenlong enjoyed was the process of making money. Therefore, Zhu Lian could only trouble friend Changming to come here again. This Luopa Mountain's patriarch of discipline had some of his original supernatural powers related to money and fortune. He was indeed unreasonable. Changming helped Wei Wenlong find and fill in the gaps. He re-evaluated 3 treasures that were mistaken for high-grade spiritual weapons. However, there were still a few items on the mountain that Changming didn't dare to determine their true value. In the end, Changming gave a final estimate of 69 items on the mountain. It was a sky-high price. It needed to be converted in Guyu money. Moreover, it had 1,000 characters. Changming smiled and said, one matter is another matter. The sword-worshipping platform will record a small mistake. This matter must record a great merit for Pei Qian. In the matter of making money on Luopa Mountain, at present, other than the master, Pei Qian is the most hardworking. Zhu Lian rubbed his hands and said with a smile, after all, he is my master's first disciple. Zhu Lian then asked, why don't I call Brother Wei and Brother Mi to confirm again? Friend Changming's total estimate is definitely correct. At most, it's a difference of 100 Guyu money. However, it's still a fly in the ointment of a single item. Once it's finalized, we might be able to earn another 200 or 300 gu money for free. After all, friend Chang Ming's estimate was only the estimate of the value of the 70-odd items themselves. As for the transactions on the mountain, especially the immortal masters who came from the sect, the younger they were, the more money they had. They were generous, and it only depended on whether they liked it or not. Chang Ming was in a good mood when it came to the increase of Luopa Mountain's fortune. He joked, "You really feel sorry for Pei Qian. Zhu Lian was so careful." Other than earning more Guyu money for Luopa Mountain, in the end he still didn't want Pei Qian to suffer any losses. Zhu Lian laughed loudly. A moment later, other than the butler of Luopa Mountain, the patriarch of discipline, and the accountant, another 2 people came. One was Mi Jianxian, and the other was Wei Shanjun, who was always on call without complaint and had come to the other mountains without any complaints. Wei Pai inspected many spiritual weapons on the mountain one by one. Among them, Wei Pai was more interested in 2 items. They were a strange stone roller and an even more inconspicuous square towel. Wei Pai smiled and said that since they were a pair, they should be regarded as 2 magic weapons. It was an ancient seal script that had been lost in the vast world for a long time. The 2 items were the seal script Jin Fa Chao and Si Jia Fang. In addition, Zhu Lian's hometown was the blessed land of lotus flowers in the past. He didn't know why there was no custom of tea competition. If not, Zhu Lian would never let Wei Pai pick up the leftovers. Because Zhu Lian was the real expert when it came to music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. After Wei Wenlong learned about this inside story, he immediately looked at Zhu Lian. Without Wei Wenlong's words, Zhu Lian had already put his hands behind his back. It seemed that he had already prepared a draft. He immediately blurted out, "On both sides of the tea roller, I will add 2 inscriptions. The rolling sound is sonorous, each has its own law, so that the strong cannot follow the wrong path. I am Jin Fa Chao. The sound of the zither and the zither, surrounded by the 4 mountains, so that the weak can walk on this path unharmed, laughing with the wind. As for this square towel, I can do the inscriptions. Let Mr. Cui write it in cursive." In the scorching heat of the mountain, feather fans and silk towels, cool shade trees, bamboo chairs, red sleeves, light makeup, green tea blended with the wind, green mountains brushed against one's face, the moon and stars fell on one's shoulders. White clouds, several boats crossed the ferry, birds fluttered in front of the mountain. What a pair of kind-hearted people. Wei Wenlong nodded and said, "In this way, the 2 items are not sold separately. They are priced as magic weapons, and the price has to be doubled to be fair." Mi Yu stood aside dumbstruck. "Mother Ker, you can make money like this. How did you guys come to such a tacit understanding? Didn't I come to Luopa Mountain with Brother Wenlong? Fortunately, Sword Immortal Me didn't make a wasted trip tonight." 2 of the old magic weapons that had fallen to high-class spiritual weapons were raised to the rank of genuine first-class magic weapons. One of them was a sheathless long sword with the inscriptions of Slender Eyebrows and Moon Halo on both sides of the sword. It was once the beloved sword of a sword immortal of the demon race in the wasteland world. Later, when the sword immortal's cultivation level was high, it became a useless item and was given to a disciple of the sword immortal of the wasteland world. In the end, it was passed down to another family and lost its inheritance order. Now, even the scabbard had disappeared without a trace. This was enough to show the sincerity of the great deity of Sui Mountain. Moreover, The head deity of Mount Central was not like the old scholar, who clearly had such thoughts but never told others. If Bai Yi did not come to climb the mountain, he would leave it. If he did not come, he would leave it there. Otherwise, with the old scholar's character, he would take the initiative to bring his brush, ink, paper and inkstone to block Bai Ye's door. The old scholar simply turned around and stomped his feet and scolded, "How can such a big sway mountain not have a single word of Bai Ye's poetry? How can you be the great deity of Sway Mountain?" The golden armor deity said, "I don't want to disturb Mr. Bai's study in isolation." The old scholar spat, "You are not sincere enough. You and Bai Yi are not close at all, which is normal. How many people in the world can call Bai Yi brothers, and even take advantage of his own disciples' glory to be half a generation higher than Bai Yi? But what kind of friendship do you have with me? Why don't I see you begging me? Whether you beg or not is your business, whether you agree or not is my business. Do you want to talk about the order?" The golden armor deity was furious and said telepathically, "Why don't I leave you alone at the foot of the mountain and slowly talk?" The child with the tiger head hat turned a deaf ear to old Xiao, who was behind him, starting to use his natal supernatural power to fan the fire. The child was happy to slowly climb the mountain alone and enjoy the scenery of Sway Mountain. The old scholar's face immediately changed and said to the silly big guy with a pleasant face, "The scholars of the future boast shamelessly. Bai Yi has flaws too, but in the 7 laws, they are not strict and have a lot of loose adhesion. Therefore, there are very few of them. What long-waisted and strong woman with a bee's waist on Bai Ye's head? Compared to this tiger head hat, it is not cute at all, right?" The golden armored deity looked confused. Could it be that the old scholar was being kind for once and wanted Bai Yi to leave a poem of the 7 laws, carved on the cliff of Sway Mountain? The old scholar signaled to the silly big guy with his eyes that he understood. Seeing that the great deity of Sway Mountain did not seem to understand, the old scholar with his back to Bai Yi raised his hand and gently rubbed his fingers. The golden armored deity was really moved. As long as the old scholar allowed Bai Yi to leave a poem of the 7 laws, everything could be discussed. It was not a problem to let the old scholar borrow a mountain. 200 or 300 years of merit in exchange for a poem of Bai Yi. The old scholar stopped in his tracks and smiled while stroking his beard. He coughed in his heart and said slowly, "Listen carefully. Poems, laws, and old-fashioned rules, it would be strange if Bai Yi could be restrained." Unexpectedly, the child with the tiger head hat, who was dozens of steps away, said, "The 7 laws are indeed not my forte. If the great deity of Sway Mountain heard a poem of the 7 laws, it must be the work of the old scholar." The old scholar sighed and followed the tiger head hat. Just as he was about to reach out to hold the hat, Bai Yi slapped his hand away without turning his head. The great deity of Sway Mountain escorted the two to the top of the mountain. He saluted the old scholar, who was sitting cross-legged and flipping through the book, and returned to the foot of the mountain. Although Bai Yi was no longer a 14th-level cultivator, his leg strength was still much better than that of the common pilgrims. The time it took to climb the mountain was less than an hour. The old scholar turned his head and smiled at the child with the tiger head hat. "I am a little busy, so I will not get up." The child bowed to the holy master. The old scholar was very happy to see this. He was not tall to begin with, but he still had to bow. At the peak of Sway Mountain, the scenery was magnificent. In the middle of the night, the 4 heavens opened and the river of stars blurred one's vision. The old scholar said emotionally, "The will of heaven is always difficult to ask, but one has to ask. The breath of the human world is like a turtle drum, who dares not to listen?" Everywhere in the sky, it was as if a huge rock had smashed into a lake. Waves of ripples surged endlessly. This was the work of the gray-clothed old man above the flood dragon ravine, trying to open up the sky and draw the remnants of the ancient gods into the vast world. The Holy Master was in charge of mending the sky to prevent the Sage of Rites from suffering too much. As for the spells and abilities that the moon-bearing mountain ancestor left in the human world, the Holy Master would dispel them one by one. A tie-by scabbard suddenly hung beside the child with the tiger head hat. It was the talisman Yu Xian who had sent him back to Sui Mountain. Bai Yi held it lightly, wanting to say something but stopped. The old scholar nodded his head. Go. No matter if it is the vast world or the green world, the human world is still the human world. Bai Yi is still Bai Yi. Bai Yi bowed once more and bid farewell to the Holy Master to travel the world. He owed Daoist Sun too much. Bai Yi also planned to travel to the Dexian capital temple. At that time, Bai Yi was also in the Fuyao continent and was already prepared to die. He split Tai Bai's celestial sword into 4 and gave them away. Since he was able to cultivate again, Bai Yi was not worried that he would not be able to repay this favor. When he reached the Dexian capital temple, he would at most have 100 years of time. The old scholar squatted down and covered his sleeves with his hands. He said softly, traveling against heaven and earth, traveling in the night with a candle, I suddenly saw the bright autumn moon. The child with the tiger head hat held the scabbard with one hand and pressed the old scholar's head with the other. You are still young, don't complain so much in the future. In reality, other than the Holy Master who called the sage of literature a scholar, the other cultivators at the peak of the mountain were used to calling the sage of literature an old scholar. After all, there were millions of scholars in the world. For the sage of literature to have been so many years, he was indeed worthy of being called old. But in reality, the old scholar was indeed very young compared to Qin Chunan and Bai Yi. Compared to the great god of Sui Mountain, he was far inferior. But for some reason, the old scholar seemed to be very old. His appearance was so, and even his demeanor was so. He's even chosen by my eldest senior brother when he left home to travel. As long as Sister Chunhui agrees, I'll let Qing Chui City have another joyous occasion tomorrow. There are many betrothal gifts. The Beko Kekyung Building's Jiang family in Qing Chui City will each have a large portion. The Dushuan Temple doesn't have to give any dowry at all. The female Taoist with a sword on her back was a little embarrassed and angry. Chief Lu, please watch your words. Lu Qin blinked and asked tentatively, then should I let Jiang Yunxing acknowledge Sister Chunhui as his godmother? He doesn't have to betray his master and go to Qing Chui City to get a son for free. It'll sound good if word gets out. It'll greatly increase the prestige of the Dashuan Temple's sword immortal lineage. The young female Taoist with a pure jade appearance narrowed her phoenix eyes. Chief Lu. Lu Qin said helplessly, forget it, forget it. I'm indeed not cut out to be a matchmaker. However, to tell you the truth, when I traveled to Lizhu Grotto Heaven in the past, I studied palmistry for many years. I can predict fortune and misfortune through marriage. I'm always right. Sister Chunhui, why don't I take a look for you? A tall and thin old Taoist appeared at the door and said with a smile, Chief Lu, could it be that your soul has been taken over by the otherworldly demon? You're really shameless today. In the past, Chief Lu's Dao skills were profound and smooth, just like the white dew rain. Wherever you go, you'll rot. Why have you changed today? You're acting like a matchmaker out of kindness. Chunhui, why did you acknowledge Jiang Yunxing as your godson? Isn't there someone in front of you who has delivered himself to your doorstep? Why are you being so courteous with your guest? At that moment, this Taoist priest's son's attire was very nostalgic. He carried a peachwood sword on his back and had a string of copper bells around his waist. He wore a Taoist robe made of ordinary silk. There were 12 patterns on it, corresponding to the 12th month of the year. If this was seen by a fellow Taoist in the past, he would definitely praise this old Taoist priest for having a celestial aura. Lu Qin smiled and said, "You flatter me. I'm not as relaxed as you, Taoist priest Sunday." An old dog lying in his nest and keeping watch at night, his mouth moving and his body not moving. Once he moves, he'll have a different style. An old turtle that flips over the pond, stirring up trouble. Taoist priest Sun smiled and said, "Let's go, let's talk inside." Lu Chen nodded his head vigorously. He stepped over the door but did not touch the ground. Taoist priest Sun's expression remained kind as he stood at the side. However, the pure Jade Realm female Taoist priest with a sword on her back was already sweating on her forehead. It was not that she was timid. It was just that once Lu Chen's foot touched the ground inside the door, the Grand Master would treat his guest with no hesitation. The protective mountain formation, the Taoist temple's prohibition, her large group of senior and junior brothers, and even those whom she had to address as uncle masters or grand uncle masters, would instantly scatter around the Taoist temple and block his path. The Daoist cultivators of the Dexiandu temple had always liked to one-on-one with a group of people. Lu Qin jumped and stepped over the door with his other foot. He was still suspended in the air. "Hey, I'm not going in." The Taoist priest with a sword on her back did not find it interesting at all. She was always on guard as if she was facing a formidable enemy. Although she was worried that she would be implicated in the fight between the third most powerful in the world and the fifth most powerful in the world, she had to do her duty. Furthermore, the Dexiandu temple had a tradition of not losing the battle. Hence, she could only brace herself and stand where she was. Her hands were hidden in her sleeves as she silently formed a spell. Apart from trying to protect herself, she would look for an opportunity to slash the third chief of the Beko Keikyung building a few times with her sword or fiercely use a spell. Taoist priest Sun turned and walked towards the stairs outside the Taoist temple. Lu Qin retracted his foot and bid farewell to Sister Chunhui. He swaggered beside Taoist priest Sun and laughed, "The celestial sword Tai Bai is gone just like that. Don't you feel sad? I have some salt here. Brother Sun, you can use it to cook. Otherwise, the vegetarian dishes in the Taoist temple will be tasteless." Taoist priest Sun walked down the stairs. However, when he stepped on the last step, the old Taoist priest appeared tens of thousands of miles away with Lu Qin when his feet touched the surface of the street. Taoist priest Sun liked peace and quiet. He opened a summer resort outside the jurisdiction of the Dexiandu temple. It was not a place with good feng shui nor were there any restrictions. The only scenery that could be used to entertain guests was an ancient 10,000-year-old pine tree that seemed to be verdant. A boy in white was brewing tea under the pine tree. There was also an armored god with a purple beard and a laurel on his head standing by the side. Between the branches and leaves of the ancient pine tree, there was a lustrous and cute, white jade plate hanging. It looked like a document embedded in the shade of the ancient pine tree. Other than that, on the ground north and south of the ancient pine tree, there were two words carved by Taoist priest Sun and his junior brother using the celestial sword Tai Bai in the past. There was a stone table under the pine tree. After the old Taoist priest Sun Huizhong sat down, Lu Qin took off his boots and sat cross-legged. He took off the lotus crown on his head and casually placed it on the table. Lu Qin went straight to the point and said, "I came here because of my master. Otherwise, I wouldn't be willing to come here to be scolded." Taoist priest Sun frowned slightly. Aside from the fifth world that was created at the beginning of heaven and earth, the other four worlds were orderly and had a strict Tao. Regardless of whether it was the dark world or the vast world, when cultivators fought in each world, there was a heaven-shaking rule, and that was to separate the four worlds. For example, in the Qingming world, no matter how bold someone was, they would not think that they could arm wrestle with a Daoist ancestor. It was no longer a matter of whether one's Tao heart was strong or not. It did not matter if one was brave or not. However, the Daoist ancestor was not willing to go to the Beko Keikyung building. He let his 3 disciples take turns to manage the Beko Keikyung building. Even Taoist priest's son, no matter how much he disliked the second disciple, Yudo, he still respected the Daoist ancestor. Lu Qin smiled and said, Bai doesn't like to owe people favors. Therefore, if there are no accidents, he will most likely come to the Dexian-du temple to repay the favor. The Confucian temple will not stop him. I'm here today to greet you. The Beko Keikyung building and the Dexian-du temple will remain the same in the future. Bai will focus on cultivating here. It doesn't matter if Bai is listed in the Dexian-du temple's ancestral hall. The Beko Keikyung building will only treat Bai as Bai. Therefore, Master Son, you don't have to worry about this matter. Taoist priest's son nodded. Lu Chen supported his chin with one hand and leaned against the stone table. I've always heard that Brother Sun has taken in a few good disciples. They're very talented and beautiful. Why don't you let me take a look at them? Taoist priest's son asked, how did Bai die? How did he survive? Lu Qin sighed and waved his hand like a fan. Zhou Mi's unification of the way is strange. The great Tao is full of troubles. This guy messed up the heavenly secrets in the vast world. Half of the embroidered tiger died at the right time and just happened to cut off one of my important meridians. I don't trust what my disciples, He Xiaoyang, Chao Rong, and the others saw. It's better not to. Let's leave it to fate. Anyway, it's not our problem for now. Even if the sky falls, there's still senior brother Yudo, who's truly invincible, to hold it up. Taoist priest's son sneered and said, second brother Daoist is willing to lend by his sword. My eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Languid, Lu Chen said, senior brother you still has the spirit of a hero. Brother Sun, you're half a family. Don't say things out of anger. It's easy to hurt feelings. Taoist priest's son and Lu Chen looked up at the sky almost at the same time. Taoist priest's son stood up and laughed loudly. He made a gesture with his hands and the white jade plate between the branches of the ancient pine tree shone brightly. Its brilliance shrouded the world. Lu Chen hurriedly put on his boots and walked away, slipping away. When Lu Chen left and the light faded, Taoist priest's son saw an old man and a child standing in front of him. Taoist priest's son widened his eyes and was extremely confused. He said in disbelief, Bai Yi. The child wearing the tiger head hat nodded. He took out a scabbard and handed it to the old Taoist priest. He said apologetically, the Tai Bai divine sword has been destroyed. The old Taoist priest waved his hand and shouted, F***CKU. He walked quickly to the child and squatted down. He joked, which family's little kid is this? Look like a jade carving. In the future, those young girls in the Dexian-du temple won't be in the mood to cultivate. They'll just come and pinch your little face. As the ancestor, I can't say much. Bai Yi was expressionless. He only tugged at the tie of the tiger head hat on his neck. The child's mood should not be too good at this moment. On the way here, the old scholar said with certainty that the Holy Master had personally reminded him not to take off the hat in a hurry. He should at least wait until he reached the upper 5 states. Bai Yi could not imagine what it would be like for him to wear the tiger head hat before he reached the pure jade state. The old scholar at the side pinched a green talisman with 2 fingers. It slowly faded away. When the talisman was completely burned, it would be time for the old scholar to return to Howren. Taoist priest's son stood up and bowed. He smiled and said, the old scholar's style is unparalleled. The old scholar bowed and praised with a smile. Taoist priest Sunday, both parties had a tacit understanding and smiled at each other. It was better to meet them in person than to hear about them. This was how family should be. Then, the old scholar pinched the talisman with one hand and pointed to the sky with the other. Thus, as long as C.S. Songhua nodded, she would not need to go to the Lu residence, and would not ask consecrator Xie to do anything. C.S. Songhua could not be present for the old ancestor hall's discussion, but as long as she brought the message, it would be useful. Other than that, before C.S. Songhua's two direct disciples, Zhu Xing and Chaomu, ascended to the upper five realms, the White Jade Continent's Lu family would be responsible for all the heaven and earth treasures and immortal money needed for sword nurturing and refining. But even so, C.S. Songhua still refused to nod. From start to finish, she only said one sentence to the old ancestor Lu: if not for the face of the inverted hanging mountains Yuan residence, you would be asking for a sword. Of course, the White Jade Continent's Lu family did not really lack a sword immortal, but the White Jade Continent's old ancestor Lu family's old ancestor Lu had spoken, asking the old ancestor hall's old ancestor hall to complete this matter, and to be polite and respectful to sword immortal Xia. Otherwise, when they returned to the old ancestor hall, Lu Jubao would not be polite. Cui Dong laughed. Business is business. If Brother Lu is not willing to bet big, it's fine. Previously, when we borrowed money, the principal and interest, the Lu family spent a lot of money. Other than that, I can let C.S. Songhua be a consecrator of the Lu family, as thanks for Brother Lu's willingness to lend us money. Moreover, Lu Jubao did not forget his roots. Just for the White Jade Continent's martial arts fate and sword fate, he secretly spent a lot of money. Cui Dong saw it all. The rich people in the world came and went, no matter if they were new or old, there would always be someone sitting in the position of the rich. Then, who had the right to be rich? It would be a question. The world's affairs went round in circles, it was still people dealing with people. Lu Jubao said, next, the savage world will close the front lines, even if we send most of our top forces to the South Whirlpool continent. The Aquarius continent will still be in an awkward position. Cui Dong sneered, gathering mosquitoes. Lu Jubao was speechless. Fei Yu, who was famous for his carelessness, heard this and his eyelids trembled. He quickly patted his chest to calm himself down. The Dali dynasty had worked hard for more than 100 years, the wealth accumulated in the national treasury, plus the private property of the Song Emperor, was actually more than enough for a normal dynasty in the Central Plains. But before the Dali cavalry went south, just building the imitation Beko Keikyung building and supporting the cavalry was already quite difficult. In addition, there were also the sword boats that floated in the air, the mountain ferries that moved the border army as if they were walking on flat ground, the talisman armor that was tailor-made for the Dali cavalry, the siege weapons, city defense mechanisms, secret crossbows and arrows that targeted the cultivators on the mountain, the formation hubs of the coastal battle lines. With so many expensive and uncountable mountain items, even if the Dali dynasty had a few mountains of gold and silver, they would be emptied early on. What to do? Borrow money. Xiao Hu Cui Dong borrowed from Mr. Fan of the Shang family, Yupan Shui, the Lu family of the Snow Mountain Continent, the Mahesh Juzi, and secretly borrowed from the 100 schools of thought. Part of it was through the Dali cavalry going south, and the huge income from the integration of the mountains and rivers of the continent to pay off part of the debt. In addition, Cui Dong also advanced a large part of it. Of course, the Tongya continent that was destroyed and almost all the sects on the mountain were destroyed. Lu Jubao shook his head and said, no need to do this, it's not refreshing. Chen Yanzhen shook his head and said, I just think that the hidden officer is calm and peaceful, so others don't have to worry about making mistakes. Chen Wei nodded and said, that's right. Ningyao rode on her sword alone and went to the sword stone tablet that had been re-erected at the easternmost side of Ascension City. She wielded her sword at an extremely fast speed. It was as if an immortal had executed the earth-shrinking mountain river divine ability. She wielded her sword and split open the sea of clouds. During this period, she passed through a thundercloud that was intertwined with lightning. As soon as the thundercloud approached, it was completely crushed by Ningyao's copious sword qi. She kept her sword and floated to the side of the stone tablet. Ningyao leaned against the stone tablet and closed her eyes to rest. Ningyao used telepathy to ask the sword cultivators in the nearby Ascension City to leave immediately and try to get closer to Ascension City. Dozens of sword cultivators greeted each other and then left on their swords without hesitation. Not long after Ningyao used her sword Innocence to break the sky canopy, the scholarly sage who was guarding the sky canopy had already sensed that something was wrong. Therefore, he didn't stop the sword from traveling far and wide. Instead, he immediately sent a message to the Confucian temple in the Central Plains. Strange phenomena appeared in all directions of the world. The earth trembled, and many parts of the ground were overturned. Mountains collapsed and shattered instantly. Ancient existences that had been dormant for a long time appeared. They were like huge deities that had been banished to the mortal world and were punished for their crimes. They finally had a chance to make up for their mistakes. After they got up, they casually stepped on the ground and broke the mountain ridge on the spot, creating a canyon. These ancient existences that had lived for a long time were slightly slow at first. However, when their eyes, which were as large as deep pools, turned golden, they immediately regained some of their divine luster. In addition, there were also several majestic figures that appeared in several abysses and swamps that were full of miasma. Wrapped in majestic auras of mountains and rivers, they opened their mouths and inhaled the spiritual energy of the world within a radius of 50 kilometers. They even swallowed the water energy into their stomachs, instantly drying up the swamps and drying up the plants and trees. Somehow, these ancient existences that were either sleeping or watching coldly from the sidelines all knew one thing. If they didn't do anything for another 100 years, they could only wait for their deaths. In the end, they would be killed, expelled, or detained by those outsiders. Among the outsiders, the female sword cultivator with a familiar aura deserved to die the most. However, her natural and overwhelming aura scared most of the ancient existences that were dormant. However, when the immortal sword Innocence traveled far and wide in the vast world, they couldn't help but kill this person. They had to completely cut off her path to the Great Path. They absolutely couldn't let this person succeed in becoming the first Ascendant Realm cultivator in the world. In the south of the world, the cultivators of the Tongyi continent either fled far away from the troublesome place, covering their heads and running for their lives, or there were a few so-called people who had achieved Tao who were already in high positions. At the same time, a group of cultivators that had built the prototype of a mountain peak with great difficulty was almost in despair. In fact, the cultivators didn't suffer many casualties. Most of them were ants in the lower 5 realms. However, the ancestral hall that had just been built was casually smashed by an inexplicable behemoth with a wave of its arm. In addition, the spiritual energy of the world and mountains and rivers within a radius of hundreds of kilometers were condensed by it and moved away together. However, on the way of migration, a pair of golden eyes stared at an eyesore of a mountain peak that was lingering with multicolored light and rich in fate. It slightly changed its route and ran wildly. It stomped its foot heavily, but it couldn't break the mountain and river formation. Therefore, it didn't bother too much. It just glanced at a young cultivator who raised his head and looked at it, and continued to run on the ground. The burly figure that was thousands of meters tall stepped on the ground step by step. Every time it landed, it would trigger muffled thunder. That immovable mountain peak was the transcendental platform that one of the 10 young candidates in the world, the cultivator of the Liuxia continent, Xu Zhonghe, personally built by him. However, it was unknown why he came to the fifth world from the gate of the Tongyi continent. If it wasn't for that imperial bulletin that revealed the secret of heaven, no one would know that he was the young master of the Tianyu Grotto heaven of the Liuxia continent. A black-clothed scholar opened the folding fan in his hand and stood side by side with Xu Zhonghe. He smiled and said, "Brother Xu, actually we can stop it. It's a great opportunity. Don't let the goodies flow into the fields of others. Brother Xu and I work together and have the geographical advantage, so the odds of success are not small. Once we succeed, the rewards will be great. If we don't take what the heavens give us, we'll be punished." Xu Zhonghe, who was dressed in a brocade robe that was as gorgeous as the sunset, smiled and said, "I don't trust Brother Qin Wen. I'm worried that if I'm not careful, the transcendental platform will become someone else's." Chen Wen, who came from the North Continent, closed his bamboo fan and gently tapped his chest. He turned his head and looked at the distant figure of the ancient existence. His eyes were full of disappointment, as if he was watching a stream of money slip away from him. The young scholar said sadly, "You didn't accept it when it's good, and you're suspicious of people. Brother Xu, you're not a hero. If my good brother was here, I guarantee that both sides would be talking and laughing tonight and splitting the spoils." Xu Zhonghe asked, "Good brother. Brother Chen Wen, you seem to think highly of this person." Chen Wen nodded and said, "We fought side by side, earned money together, and fought in a battle of wits and strength. In short, we were both enemies and friends. We hit it off very well. However, in the end, I was still more skilled. That good brother can be considered as half a defeated opponent." Xu Zhonghe smiled and said, "I don't think so." Chen Wen tapped his face with his folding fan and said sadly, "Let me give you a kind warning, Brother Xu. In the North Continent, we have a custom. Jing Dafeng said seriously, "How can I tease you when you're trying to spread your family and pass on your legacy?" The Tai Bai sword, one of the 4 immortal swords, was divided into 4 and given to 4 people. Chen Pingan, Lu Kai, Fei Ran, and Zhao Yao. The tip of the sword was the most lethal, and the blade contained the most sword qi. The hilt was the heaviest, and it carried the remaining half of Bai Ye's sword legacy. In the end, each of the 4 youths took one. Head shopkeeper Jing used his butt to push away 2 familiar drunkards. He dragged Zhao Yao to a table and ordered 2 bowls of the shop's best and most expensive wine. Jing Dafeng asked softly, "Why are you here?" Zhao Yao smiled, "I'm just curious about this brand new world. There's no special reason." Jing Dafeng sighed softly. Forget it, forget it. What a waste of money. Others shouldn't talk about it." After drinking a bowl of wine, Xiao Yao suddenly turned his head and looked into the distance. He bid farewell and left. Jing Dafeng did not ask him to stay. Zhao Yao seemed to have casually strolled to the entrance of a street. Ning Yao's flying sword was extremely fast. She had even used a camouflage technique because there was a young lady sitting behind her. After landing at the entrance of the Ning residence, Ning Yao put her sword back into her case. The young lady was still sitting on the ground. Ning Yao walked up the steps. The young lady could only stand up and follow behind her. Zhao Yao thought that she would glance in his direction so that he could greet her. He did not expect that she was completely unaware. Zhao Yao could only call out, "Miss Ning." Ning Yao stopped and turned to ask, "You are?" Zhao Yao smiled, "Pearl Grotto Heaven, Zhao Yao." Ning Yao asked, "And?" Zhao Yao was speechless. Just as he was about to speak, he saw the strange young lady of unknown identity tug at Ning Yao's sleeve. She said in a childish voice, "Mother, our father is living well." He just obtained a section of the immortal sword Taibai's sword tip. Mother, can you discuss it with him and let it be my dowry? Then, he used the 3 pure fingers to create the 3 mountains incantation, and then the 5 mountains seal. In the end, he decided to create the thunder layout, a secret technique of the celestial master abode of Longhu Mountain. 1 law gives birth to 10,000 laws, and 10,000 laws return to the thunder law. Furthermore, there was an 8 trigrams formation that rotated slowly in his hands. In addition, there were 3 great kiliacosm phenomena of the great kiliacosm and the 5 thunderbolts gathering palm of creation. A young Taoist priest who didn't say a word after arriving at the battlefield, and wanted to kill an ascendant realm cultivator. Not only did the Taoist seal under his feet suppress the great demon Zhongguang, but it seemed that he wanted to fight the throne Yuan Shou to the death. The Grand Heaven Master of Mount Longhu seemed to want to see through the true meaning of the heavenly Tao all by himself. Finger incantations, hand seals, and thunder formations were executed in the blink of an eye. Even a pure Jade Realm cultivator would not be able to see how many Daoist incantations Xiao Tianlai had performed, let alone how he was holding the incantations. Moreover, Xiao Tianlai didn't seem to need to chant incantations to stabilize the true meaning of the Daoist technique. Therefore, this was not some mysterious technique, but the Tao arises from the heart, and all laws return to one, that circulated among the cultivators at the peak of the mountain. In the end, the celestial master's Dharma idol completed the incantation. He actually combined all the Daoist incantations and Taoist seals into a sword technique. It was as if he was holding a white sun in his hand, and the light was boundless. It was as if 90,000 sword chi shot out at the same time. The cultivators of the Jade sect and the attacking army of the wasteland world, no matter how far they were, had no choice but to immediately close their eyes without exception. They didn't dare to take another look. After a moment, the world fell silent. It seemed to be the scene of loud thunder but small raindrops. However, when they looked again, the throne Yuan Shou actually didn't have a long staff in his hand. Instead, he held a sword in one hand for the first time. He stood in the air 100 miles away, dragging the great demon Zhongguang, whose robe was mostly torn. Zhongguang's entire back was a bloody mess. Even with the tough physique of an ascendant realm cultivator, there were still no signs of recovery. The great demon Zhongguang said with his last breath, "Thank you for saving my life, Ancestor Yuan." Yuan Shou looked down and suddenly let go of his hand. He stomped his foot through Zhongguang's chest again, gently twisting his ankle and crushing his opponent's chest even more. He raised the long sword in his hand and pressed it against the bastard's forehead. He said angrily, "Good fellow, you were pretending to be dead all this time. Do you think my natal item is worthless?" She never pretended to be nice to me, the sect head. However, she has always admired Grand Celestial Master. Why don't I take this opportunity to ask her to come to Grand Celestial Master's side and get some immortal chi? Maybe she'll be a little nicer to me in the future. Great Celestial Master, can you not be calculative with me about this? Zhao Tianlai smiled and said, "Of course." The real identity of Zhonyang, the shopkeeper of the Great Spring Dynasty's border inn, was Lady Huan Sha, a 9-tailed heavenly fox. However, the famous mountain guardian of Mount Longhu's celestial master residence, Lian Jin, was a 10-tailed heavenly fox. After receiving Jiang Shangjin's imperial edict, Zhonyang immediately flew over from the place where Jiang Shangjin had cultivated in the past. She landed quite a distance away from the two of them. Then, she quickly walked over and bowed to the great heavenly master of Mount Longhu. Zhao Tianlai, on the other hand, returned a Daoist salute. Jiang Shangjin turned a blind eye to this. He squatted on the edge of the cliff and looked into the distance. For some reason, he thought of the meeting at the Hall of Ancestral Masters, which was originally to congratulate the old sect head on his breakthrough. For some reason, he thought of Old Man Sun staring blankly at the white clouds gathering and dispersing outside the door. Jiang Shangjin knew that Old Man Sun didn't really like poems and songs. However, he liked the lyrical poem with the line, "Return and come," the most. The reason was even stranger. Old Man Sun liked it for the rest of his life just because of the 3 words at the beginning. The Yu family is poor. The old sect head, Sun Yuan, was actually born in the mountains. He didn't have to worry about food and clothing, nor did he have to worry about his cultivation. His path could be said to be smooth sailing. Therefore, even Jiang Shangjin couldn't understand why Old Man Sun liked these 3 words so much. Jiang Shangjin squatted on the spot and allowed Jianyang and Zhao Tianlai to ask about matters related to cultivation. Jiang Shangjin chewed on the grass root until there was nothing left. However, he still chewed on it subconsciously. The Yu family is poor. They borrowed the green bamboo staff from their lord and went deep into the white clouds. No one cared if their straw shoes broke. Will the fields never return? Jiang Shangjin leaned back and rested his hands on the back of his head. Luopa Mountain, where he served as a consecrator, the lotus root blessed land, was upgraded to a superior blessed land. Jiang Shangjin was destined to be unable to attend the ceremony. Therefore, when he held the blessed land and took in the refugees from Tongya continent, he left a few gifts in the blessed land. In addition to the necessary heavenly materials and earthly treasures, Jiang Shangjin also casually planted a willow tree and marked out a private territory in the blessed land. He finally had some of the heirs a consecrator of the Hall of Ancestral Masters should have. However, for some reason, the man personally planted the most common wild herb by the willow tree water. It was called Hengwu. The willow tree was shady and the flowers bloomed. He only hoped that one day, his sweetheart would be far away and his lover would still be there. He could enjoy the cool shade of the willow tree and watch the flowers bloom. There was a bright red Taoist robe that floated several feet above the top of the city wall. His sleeves hung down, and when the wind blew, they fluttered in the wind. He was like a leaf floating on a river, or a lone red cloud above the top of the city wall. Chen Pingan was used to being isolated from the world. When Zhou Mi removed the restriction of the Jiazi tent for some reason, he was not used to it. Fortunately, this feeling was not unfamiliar. In the past, Chen Pingan practiced boxing in the bamboo house for a long time and was fed too many punches. When he left the mountain and traveled far away, he would feel uncomfortable all over. After that, there were really demon cultivators who were not afraid of death. They shouted and rode the wind to cross the border, completely ignoring the young hermit under their feet. They did not dare to climb to the top of the city wall to enjoy the scenery, because the immortal sword spirits who could not be killed but were equivalent to earth immortal sword cultivators were still guarding the city wall. In the beginning, Chen Pingan was still worried that it was Zhou Mi's plan. He was stubborn and let the demon cultivators pass by the city wall from a high place. He politely asked a great demon who was at the same level as him to stay. After some polite greetings, he let the other party come to his door to give him gifts. He threw a bunch of spells at him and beat him to his heart's content. As Chen Pingan was beaten up obediently, he asked some small questions in the language of the wilderness. It was a pity that the other party did not treat him as an outsider and really treated him as an important guest. There was no useful information. In the end, Chen Pingan could only disperse his body. The golden core great demon laughed wantonly. Then, the hermit on the city wall behind the other party rubbed his chin and looked at the heroic great demon from afar. He did not know if he should accompany the other party to have fun or send him on his way. How was he not a man? Except for the unlucky demon who crossed the border at the beginning, Chen Pingan dragged him down and killed him on the spot with his fake jade pudding realm. Other than that, the one who punched was the previous hermit, Xiao Chua. The one who attacked was the dragon monarch of the throne. He was one of the 10 young people who competed in spells and abhijna, Jianyu. How could anyone be able to kill the hidden official once? Therefore, as a form of hospitality, Chen Pingan twisted off the head of the gold core great demon. He didn't care about the headless corpse and just threw the head high up into the air. Then, he spun around and kicked it a few thousand feet away. Once the restriction was removed, there were many such strange and interesting things. There were demon cultivators who did not dare to jump over the city wall. They only flew up and admired the words on the city wall from a closer distance. On the opposite city wall, there was a young demon martial artist who climbed the wall. He said that he wanted to spar with Chen Pingan, but he had to wait for another 30 years. There were also 3 demon sword immortals who came from the southernmost territory of the desolate world. They came together on their swords to travel. However, they did not go to the vast world. They just admired the scenery and returned to their hometowns. There was also a group of demon cultivators who looked like young women. However, the saber was covered by the wide robe. Chen Pingan's thoughts wandered thousands of miles. Some crossed each other, some were born at the same time, and some collided together. It was chaotic. Chen Pingan did not deliberately restrain himself. The law was equal, and there was no superiority. The heart has no worries, no fears, and is far away from the inverted dreams. The scholarly sage who was guarding the city wall once said that he was thinking about that person's struggle for justice. However, he could not figure it out. He just felt that such a conclusion wasn't too appropriate. The items on the mountain of the Fuyao sect were really good, but the price was really high. When Yu Qing and Mi Hu died in battle, the city had already ascended far away. Those traveling sword cultivators did not see the last sword attack of the 2 great sword immortals in their lives. The 2 great sword immortals, the top 10 candidates of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, left just like that. They did not even say a word or say anything. If even I die here, who will tell the world in the end what kind of sword immortals you sword immortals are and what kind of heroes you are? All of you, King, come back to life. I want to challenge the sword. I want to challenge all of you sword immortals, including Yu Qing, Mi Hu, Sun Juyuan, Gao Kuei, and Tao Wenquan. If I frown, I'll have the same surname as Boss Sword Immortal. Apart from sword immortals, there were even more sword cultivators who were not sword immortals, old and young, who died. They stayed on the battlefield and died on the battlefield. I have not been to Taiping Mountain. He had never seen the Mirage City after the snow fell. What kind of a place would it be like in the human world? One of the 3 sages guarding the sky screen was the city lord of the Beko Kekyung building. I wonder if Dong Haiden, Fatty Yen, and the others, who are traveling far away in the sky screen, will go sightseeing. I wonder how the 3rd sect master of the Beko Kekyung building with a lotus crown, Wu Meng, and the 7 objects of the Great Tao will be like. Previously, I saw the dew armor on Jia Yu's body, which was like wearing a 7-colored garment. It was hard not to think of the female sword immortal Zhou Qing who liked to swing on the city wall. Her natal flying sword was rainbow, and the sword light was also divided into 7 colors. It was as if one person had 7 natal flying swords. There were too many regrets like this. Lu Kai. Land platform. As a Qi refinement warrior, he was afraid of heights. There was also that mysterious body constitution. Although Lu Tai was a direct descendant of the Lu family, his cultivation level was not high. Although he relied on many Dharma treasures and could dispel many doubts, he dared to travel across continents to the Aquarius continent, the inverted mountain, and the Tongya continent without a Tao protector. They first met on the Fan family's ferry Osmanthus Island in Old Dragon City. Later, Chen Pingon secretly asked Wei Wenlong to look through the boarding records of the last 30 years in the Spring Banner House. Lu Tai did not board the ship midway. He indeed boarded on Osmanthus Island in Old Dragon City. However, Lu Tai never talked about his trip to the Aquarius continent. However, at that time, Chen Pingon did not trust the Lu family of the Middle-earth Yin-Yang sect, and not Lu Tai. In fact, Chen Pingon had long regarded Lu Tai as a true friend, just like the gentleman Zhong Kuei. However, Chen Pingon once had a strange feeling in the Eagle Fortress and met a person. Lu Tai said that he had two masters. Later on, Lu Tai was able to possess a woman's body, hinting that he was already in a blessed land. The old monastery master of the East Sea Monastery, as one of the few 14 realms, had very strict rules. Therefore, Lu Tai definitely did not have the ability to break the rules of the Lotus Flower Blessed Land.